Around 800 BC or earlier, could a small group from eastern France or western Germany have settled in the Wiltshire region and brought with them all Canning's cross-type pottery? There are several ways to approach this question. First, we will look at Britain's legendary early history. For this purpose, we will use 5 main sources. 3 Latin works: Nennius's Historia Brittonum, Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia, and Giraldus Cambrensis's Itinerarium Cambriae, as well as 2 texts written in medieval Welsh, Lud and Llefelys, and the Welsh Triads. In Chapter 10 of the Historia Brittonum, written by Nennius around AD 830, he presents a version of Britain's foundation. In Homer's epic The Iliad, Aeneas, one of the Dardanian leaders of Troy, is one of King Priam's son, Hector's most important allies. According to the Aeneid, an epic written by Virgil around 25 BC, Aeneas survived the destruction of Troy and fled with his son Ascanius to Italy, where he was received by the Latin king Latinus. He married the king's daughter Lavinia, and thus became the ancestor of Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. According to Nennius, Ascanius marries and his wife becomes pregnant. When Aeneas learns that his daughter-in-law is expecting, he orders a sorcerer to be sent to his son to determine the child's gender. The sorcerer examines the pregnant woman and predicts that she will give birth to a boy who will become the bravest among the Italians and beloved by all. But upon hearing this prophecy, Ascanius kills the sorcerer. When the child is born, the mother dies, and the boy is named Brutus. As the prophecy foretold, one day while playing with other children, Brutus accidentally shoots his father with an arrow and kills him. As a result, he is exiled from Italy. He travels to the islands of the Tyrrhenian Sea, named after the Tirsanoi, also known as the Etruscans, from where he is also expelled under the pretext of avenging Turnus, who was killed by Aeneas. Then he goes to Gaul, where he founds a city named Turones. Finally, he arrives in Britain, settles on the island, and spreads his lineage there. Since then, the island has been full of his descendants. Geoffrey of Monmouth devotes the first book of his Historia Regum Britannia to Brutus's story. He describes how Brutus and his followers leave Gaul and arrive in Britain. Brutus, with the approval of his companions, loads the spoils they have gained onto ships, sets sail, and heads toward the promised island with a favorable wind. Eventually, they reach the shores of Totnes. At that time, the island was known as Albion and inhabited only by a few giants. However, the pleasant nature of the land, its fish-rich rivers, and forest views increase Brutus and his men's desire to settle there. They travel across the entire country, driving the giants into mountain caves, and following the orders of their leader, divide the land among themselves. Then they begin farming and building houses. Soon the island appears as if it had long been inhabited. Finally, Brutus gives the island his own name, Britain. His companions are called Britons. Thus, he aims to immortalize his name. The most interesting detail Geoffrey provides is the information that Brutus and his men landed on the shores of Totnes. Today, Totnes is a market town located at the head of the estuary of the river Dart in the Devon region and was founded by the Saxons around AD 900. There is very little evidence of settlement from before this period. The oldest known signs of life in the area are from a Neolithic cooking site excavated in the 1950s at Hazard Hill, 3 kilometers west of Totnes. Between Totnes and Dartington, again about 3 kilometers apart, 2 Bronze Age axes have been found. In Dartington North Wood, there are protected Bronze Age earthworks, and traces of settlements from the Iron Age and Roman-British periods have also been discovered. Although the nearest Roman capital was Isca Dumnoniorum, remains from the Roman era have also been found around Totnes, Not far from Totnes, in the Dartmoor region, evidence of human activity dates back at least 12,000 years. This has been determined by analyzing ancient pollen and charcoal remains, along with examining flint tools that still exist today. According to the official website of Dartmoor National Park, more concrete evidence of human activity is found in burial chambers built from granite stones and covered with earthen mounds. Although few of these structures have survived, over 1,500 barrows or cairns have been found in the area. These circular burial mounds date from between 2,500 BC and 1000 BC. Prehistoric Dartmoor had a rich religious life. It stands out as the region in northwest Europe with the most ceremonial sites. These include stone rows, which often end in a burial mound, single-standing stones, and stone circles. The people who built these stone rows and cairns lived in round stone houses. More than 5,000 such structures have been identified to date, and they were in use around 1500 BC. Like the inhabitants of Hampshire and Wiltshire, those in Dartmoor also developed their own rectangular field systems. These fields were separated by low boundary lines made of stone and earth. However, by 1000 BC, the climate of Dartmoor, just like around Salisbury Plain, had become wetter and colder. Once fertile lands had weakened and turned into peat layers. This led to the gradual abandonment of settlements in high areas. Evidence of continued settlement has only been found in a few small places. In the Roman period, the Devon region was under the control of the Dumnoni tribe. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the Kingdom of Dumnonia continued to exist in Devon until around AD 800. Therefore, it is possible that Geoffrey of Monmouth drew on Dumnonian traditions about the ancient inhabitants of Dartmoor in his stories. Interestingly, Geoffrey notes that Brutus and his companions drove the giants living there into mountain caves. If the word cave here refers to burial mounds, these giants might have been likened to the mound people, known as Sidhe or Gorsedd in Celtic traditions. Among Dartmoor's most striking geological formations are the tors, stone outcrops naturally shaped by erosion and usually found near the tops of hills. The word tor is one of the few Celtic origin words in English. Although its exact origin is unknown, it is believed to be related to the Latin word turris, meaning tower. However, this Latin word has no direct equivalent in other Indo-European languages except for a similarity with the Greek word tursis. As noted by the German linguist Paul Kretschmer, both of these words appear to be related to place names from the Lydian region in Anatolia. These words are also thought to be connected to the Etruscans, who are referred to as Tirsanoi or Tyrrhenioi in Greek sources and as Tusi in Latin texts. So, what is the connection between the Lydians and the Etruscans? According to the Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote around 430 BC, after a long famine, the Lydians decided to divide their people in two. One part stayed in Lydia, while the other set out to find new lands and eventually reached Italy, becoming the Tyrrhenians, that is, the Etruscans. According to Dutch professor Robert Beeks, a specialist in comparative Indo-European languages, during the time of the Trojan War, the Lydians lived in the region of Maionia, located in northern Anatolia, south of the Sea of Marmara. Later, under pressure from the Phrygians coming from the Balkans, they migrated southward into what is now the inland areas of Manisa and Izmir. Maionia was adjacent to the region of Troy, known as Troas. According to Beeks, the city called Wilusa by the Hittites, located in Troas, had a language of Indo-European origin. In the same region, another city known to the Hittites as Taruisa had a language that was not Indo-European. After the Trojan War, due to Phrygian pressure and a global cooling event that caused famine, the people of Taruisa migrated westward and reached Italy. The name Tyrsonoi may have been derived from this Taruisa. Meanwhile, the people of Maionia moved south and became the Lydians. So, are the words Tor and Turris of Anatolian origin? This is not a necessary conclusion. The famous Iranic languages expert H.W. Bailey proposed that the Latin word Turris might have derived from the Iranic languages spoken by peoples such as the Scythians, Sarmatians, and Cimmerians, who lived in the region stretching from the Black Sea to the Danube. Bailey refers to the word Turaka in Totnes, an Iranian language spoken in northwest China, which means the cap of a quiver. He relates this word to the Ossetian word Turga. He also notes connections between these two words and the Sanskrit word Torana, as well as the Khotanese word Torah. According to him, these words may all be derived from a common Indo-Iranian root, meaning to place upon, to surround, to be above. Bailey also suggests that the Ossetian word Turga, which refers to a kind of enclosed area, is semantically related to the Greek word Tursis and the Latin Turris. Ossetian is an Iranic language spoken in North and South Ossetia, which borders Georgia. Beeks's theory that the Etruscans migrated from Taruisa in the Troas region of northwestern Anatolia, together with Bailey's hypothesis that the Latin Turris was derived from the Iranic languages of ancient peoples living north of the Black Sea, reinforces the thesis presented before, coincided with large-scale population movements throughout the Mediterranean. This also brings a new perspective to the Brutus legend, which claims Trojan origins. Perhaps Brutus gave his name not only to Britain, but, in a more down-to-earth sense, also to the Tors of Dartmoor. Of course, it is unlikely that the name Britain truly derives from a man named Brutus. The name was first used by the Greek philosopher Aristotle in the 4th century BC, at a time when the people were called the Prytani. As mentioned earlier, the name Britain is usually derived from the Indo-European root quer, which gave rise to words such as cruth in Old Irish and pride in Welsh. In this context, the names Cruthen in Old Irish and Pryden in Middle Welsh refer to the Picts, while Prydain in Welsh refers to Britain. In this framework, the Britons are described as the painted people, and Baudis suggests that the character Pryderi in the Mabinogion actually means Mr. Britain. However, the linguist Pokorny approaches this etymology with skepticism. While discussing the etymology of the town of Prättigau, which had the older name Pertenis and is located in the Rhaeto-Romance region of Val Partennes in Switzerland, Pokorny links the name Prytani to the Indo-European form Prytano, and relates it to the Old Indic Pratetai and the word Kempfer, meaning fighter. This etymology is based on another explanation by Pokorny regarding the root per dash. This root appears in various forms, such as Prytana in Old Indic, Peret in Avestan, and Primo in Latin. In Sanskrit, the words piart, war, and Prytana, battle, are found in dictionaries, and in Old Persian, the word partara appears in the inscription on the tomb of Darius dated to 486 BC. As in the case of the word Tor, here too we find clues of long-distance connections between Britain and Central or Eastern Europe. Giraldus Cambrensis was the son of a powerful Anglo-Norman baron named Guillaume de Barry, the grandson of a Welsh princess, and the nephew of Bishop David Fitzgerald of St. David's. In AD 1184, he began to serve King Henry II of England as royal clerk and chaplain. He accompanied the king's son, John, on a campaign to Ireland and published his observations in Topographia Hibernica. Later, he traveled across Wales with Archbishop Baldwin of Exeter to recruit soldiers for the Third Crusade. He recounted this journey in his work Itinerarium Cambriae and afterward wrote Descriptio Cambriae. In Itinerarium Cambriae, he mentions spending a night at Swansea Castle while traveling through the Gower Peninsula in Glamorgan, and then tells a very curious story. According to the story, which took place not long before, a priest named Elodoris told it with great seriousness. When he was 12 years old, Elodoris, trying to escape the constant beatings from his teacher, hid in a hollow bank beside a river. After 2 days without food, 2 small men, the size of dwarves, appeared and said to him, "If you come with us, we will take you to a land full of wonders." Elodoris accepted their offer and followed them through a dark underground passage. They arrived in a land decorated with rivers, meadows, forests, and plains, but never fully lit by sunlight. During the day, it was always cloudy, and at night it was very dark, as there was no moon or stars. He was brought before the king and observed at length by the people of the court. Then he was handed over to the king's son. These people were very small in stature, but proportionately built. Their skin was fair, their hair long, falling to their shoulders like women's. They kept horses and hounds of suitable size. They did not eat meat or fish, but fed on milk-based mixtures prepared with saffron. They did not swear oaths, as they considered lying to be the most despicable act. Whenever they visited our world, they criticized our greed, disloyalty, and fickleness. They had no collective worship, but held a deep respect and love for the truth. Elodoris lived with this community for some time and often returned to our hemisphere to see his mother. One day, his mother said, "Bring me a gift from that land full of gold." So he stole the golden ball used by the king's son during play. However, on his way home, he was followed by 2 dwarves who took back the ball and said goodbye to Elodoris with scornful looks. Elodoris then searched the riverbanks for a year, trying to find the passage to the underground world again, but he could never find it. In time, he became a priest, but whenever Bishop David II of St. David reminded him of these memories in his old age, Elodoris could not speak of the experience without shedding tears. In Giraldus's words, he had learned the language of that people, and in his youth, he spoke it and taught me some words. The bishop often noted that this language was quite similar to Greek. For example, when they asked for water, they said idor idorum, because idor means water in both their language and in Greek. Similarly, in the British language, dur also means water. When they wanted salt, they said halgein idorum. In Greek, salt is hal, and in Welsh it is halen. This is because the Britons, first called Trojans due to their origins from Troy, and later called Britons after their leader Brito, stayed for a long time in Greek lands after the destruction of Troy, and many Greek elements remained in their language. Elodoris's story clearly draws from the same roots as the legends used by Nennius and Geoffrey of Monmouth. However, in Geoffrey's version, the giants who fled into caves have been replaced here by underground dwarves. A unique feature of Giraldus's account is the similarity between the dwarves' language and Greek, which may reflect a folk memory of an Indo-European language spoken in Britain before the arrival of the Celts. The story of Lud and Llefelys is among the native tales of the Mabinogion, and is believed to have been written down between AD 1225 to 1250, though its origins may date back to the 11th century. In this story, Lud is identified with the god Nodens, or Nodons of the Roman period temple at Lydney Park in Gloucestershire. The name Llefelys contains an element similar to Lugh, a figure in the 4th Mabinogion tale, who is linked to the god Lugus. In the story, Lud is the son of Beli and the king of the island of Britain, while his brother Llefelys has become king of France by marrying the daughter of the previous ruler. During Lud's reign, Britain faces 3 disasters, or oppressions in some translations. The first disaster begins with the arrival of a people called the Coranians. This group possesses such advanced knowledge that, no matter how quietly anything is spoken on the island, they hear it when the wind carries the words, making them immune to harm. The second disaster occurs every year on May Eve. A terrible scream rises from every hearth in the land. This cry pierces people's hearts. Men turn pale and weak, women miscarry, young people go mad, and even animals, trees, and the soil become barren. The third disaster is that no matter how much food and drink is prepared in the king's palaces, even a year's supply, everything vanishes except what is consumed on the first night. Lud doesn't know how to deal with the Coranians or the causes of the other 2 disasters, so he consults his brother Llefelys. To prevent the Coranians from eavesdropping, they speak through a bronze tube. Llefelys gives Lud some insects to grind in water and sprinkle over the Coranians to defeat them. As for the second disaster, Llefelys explains that it is caused by a dragon, which is being attacked by another dragon of foreign origin, trying to gain dominance over the island. The third disaster, he says, is the work of a magical man who puts everyone to sleep with enchantments and steals the king's provisions. To resolve these issues, Llefelys suggests certain methods. To neutralize the dragons, Lud must measure the island, dig a large pit at its exact center, place a cauldron full of mead inside, and cover it with satin. The dragons will eventually fall into the pit, drink the mead, fall asleep, and then be buried in a secure place. For the food theft, Lud must sit by the feast with a cauldron of cold water to avoid falling asleep. Lud follows this advice. He crushes the insects and defeats the Coranians, lures the battling dragons into the cauldron of mead, and buries them at Dinas Emrys. Then he prepares a great feast and stands guard with the cauldron of water. After a while, he hears magical melodies and songs. To stay awake, he repeatedly plunges himself into the cold water. Finally, a huge armored man arrives, and with the basket he carries, begins to gather all the food and drink. Lud is astonished that so much could fit into one basket. The king follows the man and stops him, saying, "Stop, stop! Enough of your destruction and thefts. Unless your strength is greater than mine, this ends now." The man drops the basket and fights Lud. The clash is so fierce that sparks fly from their swords. In the end, Lud wins and brings the magical man down. The giant apologizes for everything he has done and pledges loyalty to Lud. Before analyzing this tale, it is worth citing Triad 36 from the Welsh Triads, which is associated with Lud and Llefelys. This triad speaks of 3 oppressions that came to the island of Britain and never left. One of them is the Coraniad, who arrived during the reign of Bailey, son of Caswallaun, possibly Lud. This people came from Arabia and never returned. The second oppression was the Gwydil Fichti, who also did not return. The third was the Saxons under Horsa and Hengist. The Saxons mentioned in Triad 36 can easily be linked with the warring dragons. In the Historia Brittonum, Vortigern wants to build a fortress, but every night the building materials disappear. His advisors tell him, "Find a child without a father and sprinkle the foundation with his blood." When the child is found and hears this, he says there is a pool beneath the site, and in it 2 vases, inside the vases a tent, and inside the tent 2 sleeping serpents. The serpents awaken and fight. The white one defeats the red one 3 times, but in the end, the red serpent gains strength, defeats the white one, and emerges from the pool. The child explains, "The pool represents the world, the tent the kingdom, and the serpents are two dragons. The red one represents the Britons, and the white one stands for the people who occupy most of the island. In the end, the Britons will rise and drive the Saxons back across the sea from which they came. Thus, the warring dragons, one of the three oppressions, refer to the Saxons who never returned. The giant man, the food thief, is likely identified with the Gwydl Fichti. This term is used in medieval Welsh literature for the Picts of Scotland. However, since this man is portrayed as a giant who uses magic to make people sleep, he belongs to a mythological age. The combination of food, music, and theft recalls a passage from Deep Nosophists by the Greek writer Athenaeus, who lived around AD 230. Citing Posidonius, Athenaeus tells how the Celts even took their poets and musicians into battle. These bards sang praises to both large crowds and individuals. They composed songs to celebrate the bravery of warriors. This reference to the mythical past becomes even more apparent through the magical basket carried by the giant man. This basket reminds us of the magical bag that Rhiannon gives to Pwyll in the first tale of the Mabinogion, and also of the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, which is a symbol of abundance associated with the Gloucestershire goddess. The Picts are, in a sense, seen as a people belonging to a mythological time. They were a confederation of tribes who lived in northern and eastern Scotland from before the Roman invasion of Britain until the 10th century. The Anglo-Saxon historian Bede, writing in the 8th century, stated that 5 different languages were spoken in Britain: Church Latin, English, Welsh, the Gaelic tongue, and Pictish. He also recorded a legend about the Picts. They were said to have descended from a seafaring colony from Scythia that settled in northern Britain. The Scottish history Scotichronicon, written in the 15th century, claimed that the Picts came from the Baltic coast. Is there any truth to the legend that the Picts descended from the Scythians? Dunbavin reports that W.J. Watson described these legends as learned embellishments based on Virgil's Aeneid, in which the terms Picti Agathyrsi and Picti Geloni appear. According to Dunbavin, Herodotus placed the Agathyrsi north of the Danube, above the Black Sea, and located the Geloni, who were a Greek-origin people, in the upper reaches of the Dnieper River, in what is now Ukraine. These groups were then under the dominance of the Scythians, who spoke an Iranian language. Herodotus also noted that the Agathyrsi practiced communal sharing of women, meaning that all individuals were considered members of the same family. This tradition bears a striking resemblance to the comparisons made by Julius Caesar, Dio Cassius, Solinus, and Saint Jerome about the tribes of Britain. According to Dunbavin, the Roman writer Solinus, writing in the 4th century, stated that the Agathyrsi dyed their hair and faces blue, just like what was said of the Britons. In fact, tattooing or painting animal figures on the body was not unique to the British Isles. This practice is also seen on the body of a Scythian noble excavated in Pazyryk, in the Altai region of Russia, indicating that body ornamentation was common in Scythian lands. Interestingly, the Roman historian Pliny implied that the Scythians extended as far north as the Baltic coast, which corresponds to the region given as the Picts' homeland in Scotichronicon. The most mysterious of the 3 oppressions is the Coranians, also known as the Coraniad. This name is generally thought to be linked to the Welsh cor, meaning dwarf. Coke associates it with the Old Irish words corginecht, meaning magic, sorcery, and corgwinec, meaning sorcerer, magician. The Coraniad are said to possess the ability to hear every word carried by the wind, no matter how softly spoken, an ability also attributed to the character Math in the 4th tale of the Mabinogion. Asdis R. Magnusdóttir compares the Coraniad to the Norse god Heimdallur, who could hear even the sound of growing grass and had a horn whose sound reached across the world. The method used to destroy the Coraniad is quite interesting. Llefelys recommends crushing a certain type of insect in water and sprinkling it over them. But these insects are not found in Britain. This description may refer to the Spanish fly, which is found only in southern Europe, particularly France. This insect secretes a poisonous substance called cantharidin, which causes blisters on the skin and can be lethal to horses if ingested. The fact that the crushed insects kill the Coraniad without harming Lud's people suggests a magical link between the Coraniad and horses, making them especially vulnerable to cantharidin. The most puzzling aspect, however, is the claim that the Coraniad came from Arabia. In the third tale of the Mabinogion, when Manawydan becomes a saddle maker, he paints the saddle tops with blue lapis, just like Lasser. In the Middle Ages, blue dye was obtained only from lapis lazuli, a stone sourced from Afghanistan. The word lazuli comes from the Arabic lazaward, which in turn derives from the Persian lajvard, the name of the region where the stone was found. From this root, the word azur was derived, and possibly also the name Lasser. Therefore, the phrase that the Coraniad came from Arabia may actually mean the place associated with lapis lazuli. This suggests that they may be connected to the vast territories of Eastern Europe inhabited by the Scythians and other Iranian-speaking peoples. In fact, the person who escaped from the Iron House in Ireland and brought the Cauldron of Rebirth to Britain was also Lasser. And as mentioned earlier, the technique of forging bronze cauldrons likely originated in Central Europe. Britain's legendary history is linked to many distant regions, from the Trojans to the Greeks, from the Scythians to the Baltic peoples. To make sense of all these elements, one must look at a cultural sphere often referred to as the Thraco-Cimmerian culture. This culture includes two ethnic groups, the Thracians and the Cimmerians. In Homer's Odyssey, the Cimmerians are described as a people living at the edge of the inhabited world, in a land covered with mist and darkness. In contrast, the Thracians had a more concrete past and appeared in the Iliad as allies of the Trojans. The Thracians spoke an Indo-European language that is no longer in use, and their settlement areas included what is now Bulgaria, the European part of Turkey, parts of Romania, Serbia, Greece, and North Macedonia. The Thracians were neighbors of the Greeks and are frequently mentioned in historical sources, unlike the Cimmerians. According to Herodotus, the Cimmerians originally lived north of the Black Sea and the Caucasus, in what is now Ukraine and Russia, but they were later expelled from there by the Scythians. Assyrian annals from 714 BC mention a people called the Gimiri, who helped the Assyrian king Sargon II defeat the kingdom of Urartu. Although the Gimiri were likely living in northwestern Iran at that time, they later appear to have settled in what is now Georgia. The concept of Thraco-Cimmerian culture was first proposed by Paul Reinecke in 1925 and was supported by some researchers in the 1930s. These scholars noticed that the bronze objects and weapons found in graves and burial hoards of mounted warriors in Central and Southeastern Europe resembled those from the Eastern European steppes. These warriors were thought to be the historical Cimmerians, who may have overthrown the Urnfield culture of the Carpathian Basin and Central Europe. The connection between the Cimmerians and Thracians is supported by the fact that some regions along the Black Sea coast were under Thracian influence. Moreover, the Thracians were famous for their iron ore resources and for their horses and mounted warriors. Where the Cimmerians came from, and where they lived is still debated. Christian Christiansen notes that from around 900 BC, wealthy and well-organized political structures, resembling kingdoms or tribal chiefdoms, emerged in the Caucasus, and these regions interacted with civilizations to the south. Early Thraco-Cimmerian style horse bits and bridle pieces have also been found there. According to Christiansen, during the 9th and 8th centuries BC, a group sharing common cultural elements spread into Central Europe, forming what can be described as the Thraco-Cimmerian cultural complex. According to Buzek, among the items belonging to this culture are double-metal Cimmerian-type daggers with bronze handles and iron blades. These have been found in Silesia in Poland, Moravia in Czechoslovakia, Leibnitz in Austria, and Neuendorf in the German state of Brandenburg. Horses and chariots were fundamental elements of the Thraco-Cimmerian culture, which introduced some important technological innovations. Christiansen points out that the horse bits used in this period were of the double-jointed type, suitable for riding horses, as they did not injure the horse's mouth like fixed bits. Furthermore, the diameter of these new types of bits was typically 4 to 4.5 inches, indicating that larger breeds of horses were being raised. The chariots and wheels used were also based on more complex and advanced technologies. According to Christiansen, horseback riding had by then fully evolved into a practice of warfare, and this required the specialized breeding and training of horses. Christiansen states that this cultural expansion was quite complex, with trade and aristocratic conquests occurring one after another. For example, in Hungary, elite groups engaged in livestock farming introduced a new burial tradition and an entirely different material culture. In Slovenia, local and foreign traditions blended together. In the 8th century BC, a new princely system emerged, characterized by large fortified settlements and tumulus burials. These tumuli were built in places such as Sticna and Novo Mesto in Slovenia, and Sopron near the Austrian border to display the presence of new elites. To the north, similar tumuli from the same period have been found at Sedan in Germany and Voltofte in Denmark. It appears that the Thraco-Cimmerians were mounted nomadic warriors, spreading westward from the steppes of Ukraine and Russia, bringing with them new types of weapons and equestrian technologies. The influence of the Thraco-Cimmerian culture was especially strong in Hungary, but it seems to have extended into Austria and even Switzerland. In fact, a Thraco-Cimmerian bronze horse bit was discovered at the Zurich Alpenquai site on the shores of Lake Zurich. Although this culture did not reach Britain directly, it may have influenced it indirectly. As discussed in Chapter 5, all Canning's cross-type pottery may have been brought to Britain by a small migrant group from eastern France. According to Nancy K. Sanders, this pottery originates from the Jura region, near the French-Swiss border, which is one of the westernmost points where Thraco-Cimmerian bronzes have been found. As mentioned earlier, the arrival of all Canning's cross pottery coincided with the construction of large-scale midden heaps at sites like Pottern and East Chisenbury. However, this was not the only change. Between 900 and 600 BC, the first hill forts emerged, large hilltop enclosures and small but well-defended forts. Examples of such settlements include Danebury and Balksbury in western Hampshire. Balksbury, in particular, has been extensively excavated. The findings show that its surrounding earthwork and ditch system was built in the 9th century BC and remained in use for nearly 2 centuries. During this period, the rampart and ditch were modified several times. Among the internal structures are small 4-post granaries and lightweight circular huts. One of the most interesting discoveries is the colluvial deposit inside the inner wall, which contains midden material. analysis revealed that this material included high organic content remains, such as animal dung and fodder. All this suggests that these hilltop settlements primarily served a pastoral function. That is, they acted as animal enclosures during certain seasons. The four-post buildings may have been granaries for fodder, while the circular huts could have been shelters for people tending the animals. The size of these settlements suggests they served large communities. This also implies they were sites for seasonal gatherings and feasting, as well as practical activities such as slaughtering, castrating, and redistributing livestock. The midden material found in the colluvium at Balksbury, which includes feasting waste, supports this interpretation. Furthermore, the presence of some pottery originating from 10 to 15 kilometers away shows that the settlement was linked to a wider region. Among the smaller and more strongly fortified hill forts are Budbury in western Wiltshire, Lidbury Camp near Enford, and Oliver's Camp near Devizes. These settlements generally cover less than 7 acres. They are usually built at ridge ends, though some are found in open plains. Most have multiple lines of defense. Although all show signs of dense occupation, Oliver's Camp is weaker in this regard. No significant internal structures have been found there. According to Cunliffe, these small forts may have served as elite residences. Their prominent positions and strong defenses likely marked them as symbols of status, distinguishing them from ordinary farms. Cunliffe states that this period was one of transition, marked by rapid changes in economy, social structure, and belief systems. Before ending the discussion on the Cimmerians, we must mention some legends that associate them with the Germanic Cimbri tribe and the Celtic people called Cymri, the Welsh. The Cimbri lived in the Himmerland region of the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark, which is also where the Gundestrup cauldron was found. Ancient writers such as Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Plutarch directly linked the Cimbri to the Cimmerians. Although the origins of the names Cimmerian and Cimbri are not certain, some theories exist. One view suggests that Cimbri may derive from the Indo-European root K. From this root come words such as Greek kaitai, to lie down, kome, village, Hittite kethta, and kiteri, to lie down, Latin civis, citizen, Gothic heims, village, Old Norse heimer, homeland, world, and Old High German heim, home. Some linguists interpret this root as tekai, to settle, to establish, and from this root derive words such as Sanskrit kseti, to dwell. In that case, the names Cimmerian and Cimbri may mean settlers or village people. Another etymological theory connects the name Cimmerian with the Welsh Cymri, the Welsh people. This word is said to derive from the Celtic com, together, and brogland. The word brog is related to Latin margo, border, Gothic marca, boundary, Old High German marcha, Old English merk, Armenian mards, Ukrainian meza, and Persian mards, all meaning border or region. The word com is linked to the Greek koinos, common. The Persian word mards was used as early as the Sasanian period, when Marzban meant a border governor. However, it is unlikely that Sasanian Persian was influenced by Celtic or Latin. Therefore, the words Mars in Middle Persian and Armenian may have influenced each other or developed independently. Thus, the name Cimmerian may also derive from Indo-European roots such as Com and Mars, meaning those who live together in a shared land. In conclusion, even if the Cimmerians, Cimbri, and Cymri were not directly connected, at least two of these names seem to have originated from similar linguistic roots. According to what Cunliffe says about the Wessex period between 900 and 700 BC, the people who brought all Canning's cross-type pottery most likely lived in small but strongly defended settlements, like Lidbury Camp and Oliver's Camp. They kept their animals in hilltop enclosures such as Danebury and Balksbury, and held communal feasts there during certain times of the year. If Cunliffe's interpretations are correct, these people worshipped chthonic deities, underground gods associated with fertility. They worshipped them by building massive midden heaps at places like East Chisenbury and Potterney, offering the fruits of the earth back to the earth itself. According to Cunliffe's explanations, starting around 600 BC, this community built a new hill fort at the site of the earlier Danebury settlement. Pits were dug to protect the grain under the care of these underground gods, and later, ritual offerings such as dismembered horse sacrifices were also placed in these pits. The settlement at Danebury continued until the end of the 4th century BC. But during this time, evidence of a large fire appears, and a noticeable decline in use is observed. According to Cunliffe, this indicates a serious social upheaval. At the same time, there was a sudden change in pottery styles across a wide area, which may reflect not just a regional, but a broader social transformation. After this clearly defined boundary period, signs of life disappeared at some early hill forts, while others continued to be used and had their walls repaired. Cunliffe offers the simplest explanation for this process. A large-scale crisis may have occurred in society, perhaps triggered by the rise of rival political entities. When the crisis ended, some communities survived by maintaining their traditional structure and gaining dominance, while others disbanded or were absorbed into different structures. This explains why some hill forts were abandoned, while others developed. Although Cunliffe does not state it directly, one possible cause behind these developments may have been the rise of Celtic elites in the Thames Valley and eastern England. The pottery styles used in these regions were influenced by the Latin culture of northern France and the Low Countries. This could have led to conflicts in the border zone between Berkshire Downs and the Cotswolds, between the more conservative Southern English pottery traditions and the Latin-influenced North. All this evidence suggests that the dominant culture in southern England up to 400 BC was not Celtic, but rather one that likely evolved from the culture that produced all Canning's cross pottery and left behind large midden heaps. We have two important clues about this culture. First, they worshipped underground gods. Second, horses had a significant place in their religious rituals. It is now important to take a closer look at the role of horses in this culture. Since the Thracians and Cimmerians, who may have indirectly influenced the people who produced all Canning's cross pottery, placed great importance on horses. We have little information about the religion of the Cimmerians, but we know quite a bit about the religious beliefs of the Thracians. Horse gods have a long history in the mythology of Indo-European peoples. In Pylos, southern Greece, a linear B tablet dating to around 1200 BC mentions Potinia Iquea, or Potnia Iquea, meaning mistress of horses. The ancient Indian religious text Rigveda frequently refers to the divine twin horsemen known as the Ashvins. In Thracian mythology, the earliest reference to a figure associated with horses is found in Homer's Iliad, which is believed to have been written around 800 BC. In Book 10 of the epic, Dolon, an ally of Troy, says to Odysseus, "If you want to sneak into the Trojan army, there are the Thracians. They've just arrived, camping farthest away. Their king Rhesos is among them, son of Ioneus. His horses are the best I've ever seen, whiter than snow, faster than the wind. His chariot is decorated with gold and silver. His armor is extraordinary. It is made of gold. Such armor is not worn by mortal men. Only immortal gods are worthy of them." Here, Homer portrays Rhesos either as a divine figure or as someone godlike. This view is confirmed by the later Thracian horseman cult. This figure has been documented since the 4th century BC and is usually referred to as the Thracian horseman, or heros, hero. Robert Turkin notes that this deity is depicted on stelae in many parts of Thrace, such as Odessos and Romula. In these Roman period depictions, the Thracian horseman is sometimes shown walking and sometimes galloping. Often he approaches an altar standing in front of a tree, around which a snake is coiled. This slow approach evokes the scene where Pwyll first sees Rhiannon's horse. The Thracian horseman is sometimes shown attacking a wild boar with a spear or standing atop a lion. He is also depicted carrying slain animals such as a doe or a hare. Often, a dog is shown at his side. This recalls the ritual animal offerings at Danebury. Raphael Petazzoni notes that in at least 5 stelae, the Thracian horseman is shown with 3 heads, such as those from Philippopolis and Oiskos, and in one he has 2 heads. A Thracian word found on one of these stelae has been interpreted as panthopto. This word corresponds to panoptes in Greek mythology, meaning all-seeing, and is used for the sun god Helios. According to Petazzoni, the Thracians were a sun-worshipping people. In a surviving fragment of Tereus, a tragedy by Sophocles from the 5th century BC, the sun is addressed as, "O sun, your light is most revered by the Thracians, lovers of horses." Also, in Katasterismi, a work attributed to the 3rd century BC Greek astronomer Eratosthenes, based on a lost play by Aeschylus, the Thracian Orpheus is said to climb to the summit of Mount Pangaion before dawn to greet the rising sun. However, Herodotus states that the Thracians worshipped only Ares, Dionysus, and Artemis. He adds that the nobles, unlike ordinary Thracians, worshipped Hermes the most, swore only by him, and considered him their ancestor. The Thracian horseman is not directly mentioned. Petazzoni tries to explain this omission. He suggests that common Thracians worshipped the god Herodotus called Dionysus, while the aristocrats worshipped a god associated with Hermes. A similar situation is seen in Scythia. Herodotus writes that the Scythians worshipped certain national gods, such as an Apollo, but that the royal Scythians, to which kings and nobles belonged, considered another god sacred. In Aeschylus's play, Basarids, Dionysus is said to have ordered his followers to kill Orpheus, who worshipped the sun god. This highlights the opposition between the Dionysian and solar cults. It opens the door to the idea that the sun god may have been interpreted as Hermes. Why? According to Petazzoni, both Hermes, the guide of souls, and the sun, which sets in the west, lights the underworld during the night, and rises again in the east, have an association with the land of the dead. This explanation also helps us understand why the Greeks identified the Persian god Mithra with Helios, Apollo, and Hermes at the same time. In the inscriptions from the tomb of Antiochos, king of Commagene, Mithra is equated with all 3 of these deities. Interestingly, Persian kings also called upon Mithra as the witness of their oaths and promises, just like the Thracians made all their oaths in the name of Hermes. Based on this, Petazzoni argues that the god Herodotus called Hermes was in fact the Thracian horseman. This figure is referred to in some inscriptions as Genikos or Geniakos, ancestor of the Thracians. He is also portrayed as the all-seeing sun god, and thus takes on the role of a deity responsible for ensuring that oath-takers keep their promises. Is there a connection between Rhesos in the Iliad, the Thracian horseman cult, and the dismembered horse found in a grain pit at Danebury? David Rankin, following Henrik Wagner's 1971 book Studies in the Origins of the Celts and of Early Celtic Civilization, links Rhesos and the Thracian horseman not directly to Danebury and the dismembered horse, but rather to the Irish god Dagda. Dagda is also known as Eochaid Olater, meaning Great Horse Father. Additionally, The Thracian Hermes is associated with the Irish god Lug in Celtic tradition. From the perspective of Britain and Wales, the closest mythological equivalent to the Thracian horseman is Rhiannon, the horse goddess chosen as a partner by both Pwyll and Manawydan. The idea of marriage to a horse goddess appears even more strikingly in the topography of Ireland by the tireless traveler Giraldus Cambrensis. While traveling in the region of Kenelconnell in northwestern Ulster, he describes the following wild and disgusting ritual for appointing a king. When all the people of the region gathered, a white mare was brought into the center of the crowd. The man chosen to be king, not as a leader but as if he were an animal, not as a king but as someone outside of society, would engage in a bestial act with the horse. In this way, he defined himself as an animal. Then the mare was immediately killed, cut into pieces, and boiled. A bath was prepared in the same water for the king-to-be. He sat in this water, surrounded by his people. Together they ate the meat of the horse. The candidate drank the broth not with a cup or his hands, but by dipping his mouth directly into it. Once this sinful ritual was completed, he was accepted as king. As Daniel Bray notes, this horse sacrifice ritual bears striking similarities to the Ashvamedha ceremony from Vedic tradition. Ashvamedha involved the sacrifice of a stallion, the symbolic lying of the queen with the animal, and the communal consumption of its meat. During the ritual, hymns were recited praising the horse, directing its dismemberment, and praying for blessings. One such prayer says, "May this racing horse bring us many cattle, good horses, sons, and abundant wealth. Let Aditi cleanse us from sin. May this horse, with our offerings, bring us the power of sovereignty." As mentioned earlier, the dismembered horse placed in a grain pit at Danebury has been linked by Anne Ross to the head and hoof ritual described in the Irish epic The Destruction of Da Derga's Hostel. It seems that both the head and hoof ritual and the king inauguration rite described by Giraldus were performed under the supervision of a priest. And we must assume the priests who conducted these rituals in the 12th century AD were the direct descendants of the priests who oversaw horse offerings at Danebury in the 6th century BC. These priests were actually Druids, and this priestly class was born around 800 BC in the Wiltshire region, around the midden heaps, and in the small but strongly defended forts. The first piece of evidence supporting this claim lies in the origin of the word Druid. Although its etymology is debated, the most common interpretation is oak seer or oak diviner. As West notes, this meaning connects the Druids with the oracle site at Dodona in the Epirus region of northwestern Greece. According to West, this sacred place was not Greek but Illyrian in origin. Susan Gettel-Cole explains that the oracle of Dodona was located in a remote valley of Epirus and had ancient roots. The priests there, called Seloi, walked barefoot and never washed their feet. The god Zeus was believed to be represented by an oak tree growing in the sanctuary. He was served by 3 priestesses, and doves were present around him. It is not fully known how the god's answers were delivered, but some believed they were interpreted from the rustling of oak leaves or the calls of doves. Questions were written on small lead tablets by those seeking prophecy. Dodona is also mentioned in the Iliad. Achilles prays, "O Zeus of Dodona, god of the Pelasgians, you who dwell far away in wintry Dodona." Archaeologist Sotiris Dakaris, who excavated Dodona, states that the cult dates back to around 2000 BC, from the end of the early Helladic to the beginning of the Middle Helladic period. He also emphasizes that the dove was a sacred animal and divine symbol in Minoan Mycenaean religion. Zeus's presence at Dodona is believed to date to the 13th century BC. This was not the only sacred oak in Greece. On Mount Lycaon in Arcadia, there was a spring called Hagno, believed to be the place where Zeus was raised. It was named after Hagno, one of the nymphs who raised Zeus. Pausanias writes, "If drought persists, seeds dry up in the earth and trees bear no fruit, the priest of Zeus at Lycaon prays over the water, offers a sacrifice, and touches the surface of the spring with an oak branch, not dipping it deep. When the water is disturbed, a mist rises. This turns into a cloud, attracts other clouds, and finally rain falls on Arcadia." Classical writers associated Druids with bards and seers in Vates. The etymology of these two words is also illuminating. Bard probably comes from the root gueru, meaning to raise the voice, to praise, and is related to Avestan, Ibi, Jarate meaning praiser, and Sanskrit jaratar, meaning singer, praiser. Another view, from Enrico Campanile, traces it to Guero de Os, meaning one who creates praise, linked to Sanskrit Giroda and Avestan Garoda. In Sanskrit dictionaries, Gir means speech, call, praise, while in Avestan, the root gar means to sing a hymn of praise. In Kanga's Avestan dictionary, Garo is defined as call, prayer. Similarly, the Alteranisches Wörterbuch defines Gara as hymn, song of praise. The word Vates is connected to Germanic words that combine poetry and trance. These include Gothic waths, possessed, Old High German wat, show frenzy, Old English wad, song, and Old Norse othuarsar, in a trance-inspired poetry. All of these are associated with the Norse god Odin, or Woden in Anglo-Saxon. N.D. Kazanas suggests that Woden-Odin may be an evolution of the Vedic god Vata, a form of the better-known Vayu. Vata shares traits with Odin: speed, sudden anger, descending from the sky in storms, roaring with thunder, and possessing the treasure of immortality that gives life to his faithful. The Welsh bard Taliesin speaks of something he calls awen, inspiration. This word shares a root with Welsh awl, breeze. The connection between breeze, inspiration, a second piece of evidence suggesting that the priests active in Wiltshire around 800 BC were Druids, or at least came from lands where oak was sacred, can be found in other graves at Danebury. As mentioned earlier, a dog skeleton was found alongside the dismembered horse at Danebury, though little has been said about this dog so far. J.P. Mallory and Douglas Q. Adams confirm that the association of dogs with death is a widespread Indo-European theme. In the Vedas, the god of death Yama is accompanied by two four-eyed dogs who guard and guide the soul's journey. In Iranian tradition, a four-eyed dog is brought to the dead and believed to ward off demons with its gaze. The soul's spiritual essence, called Dina, appears as a beautiful woman and is escorted to paradise by two dogs. The best-known underworld dog is Cerberus, the three-headed hound from Hesiod's Theogony. Green emphasizes the ritual importance of dogs at Danebury. In a pit dated before 500 BC, two dog skeletons were found alongside 20 bones selected from both wild and domestic animals. After the animals were placed, chalk blocks were added, and a large wooden structure was built over them. Green notes that the frequent pairing of horse and dog at Danebury is statistically significant and unlikely to be random. Another notable animal at Danebury is the raven. According to Green, in Romano-Celtic iconography, ravens are associated with various protective deities. The healing spring deity at Mavely in Burgundy is depicted with a large raven. At Sarreburg, near Metz and Speyer in Germany, the goddess Nantosuelta is also shown with a raven. In Luxembourg, a goddess figure sitting inside a house-shaped altar is accompanied by a raven. Interestingly, in an image from Altrier in Luxembourg, the horse goddess Epona is shown with both a dog and a raven. The raven, or crow, is not a symbol unique to Britain. It also has deep meaning in ancient Greek and Mediterranean cultures. In fragment 89 of the Catalogue of Women, Hesiod recounts that a crow came to Apollo to tell him that his lover Coronis had married Ischys. Herodotus writes about Aristeas of Proconnesus, a legendary Greek poet of the 7th century BC. According to the story, Aristeas was taken by Apollo to the Isidones, a people in Central Asia. In fact, Aristeas reappeared 200 years later in the city of Metapontum in southern Italy, where he told the people that he had wandered with Apollo in the form of a raven. Metapontum is associated not only with Aristeas, but also with Pythagoras. This philosopher, who lived between 570 and 495 BC, is known for his belief in reincarnation, and some sources link him to the Druids. Born on the island of Samos, Pythagoras later settled in Croton in southern Italy, and then in Metapontum. According to legends, he was seen as a reincarnation of Hyperborean Apollo. One story even says that he met the Hyperborean priest Abaris, who traveled the world on an arrow. Pythagoras took this arrow from him and made him his student. Apollo is a very ancient god. In the first book of the Iliad, when the Greek army captures the daughter of his priest Chryses, Apollo grows angry and strikes people and animals with plague arrows for 9 days. Morris Silver mentions Cook's theory that the cult of Apollo spread from the land of the Hyperboreans along the ancient Amber route. One of the sources supporting Cook's theory is Pausanias, who says that the founders of Apollo's cult in Delphi were Hyperboreans. Apollonius Rhodius writes that when Apollo was exiled to the land of the Hyperboreans, he wept amber tears. According to Pausanias, Apollo sent the second temple of Delphi to the Hyperboreans. Herodotus also says that the sacred grain offerings for Apollo's summer festival in Delos were brought by special messengers called the Perpheres and by Hyperborean maidens. Silver notes that Farnell interpreted these stories symbolically, suggesting that the Hyperboreans were actually real. Describing Druids as oak seers connects them to early Greek or Mycenaean religious practices, but this title may not fully reflect the nature of the priests who guided the underground beliefs in southern England. Therefore, it is possible to suggest a different origin for the word Druid. This brings us to a mysterious Welsh poem called The Spoils of Andubion. In line 24, the poet refers to the four-peaked fortress, the island of the strong door. As discussed in Part 3, the four peaks symbolize the sky, while the strong door represents the threshold between this world and the other world. The word door in the poem is dor in Welsh, and similar forms are found across Indo-European languages: Sanskrit divar, Avestan divarum, Greek thura, Baltic duris, Latin foris, German tur or tor. Based on this, we can suggest that the first part of the word druid means door, and that a druid is the one who knows the door, or the guardian of the gate, a gate that opens to the other world. This idea aligns with ancient sources that show that during the early 1st millennium BC, people began to view gates or thresholds as sacred paths to the other world. For example, Hesiod, in Theogony, refers to the gates of terrible Persephone and mighty Hades, guarded by Cerberus. In ancient Rome, the very old god Janus was associated with gates, although he had no clear link to other Indo-European gods. Fraser believed that Janus was a sky god, whose name came from the same die root as Zeus. He also noted that Janus was connected to the oak groves of the Janiculum Hill on the right bank of the Tiber. Another theory suggests that Janus was related to the Etruscan sky god Ani, and as seen before, the Etruscans may have migrated from northwestern Anatolia. Even if Janus cannot easily be compared with other European gods, Norman O. Brown argues that he shares traits with Hermes. Like Hermes, Janus represents boundaries, carries a magical wand, and is considered the inventor of various arts and religious rituals. Hermes himself is a form of the Thracian horse-riding god. Like Janus, Hermes also looks in two directions. He is the god of the sky, the sun, and the underworld. Truly, he is the master of many gates. If the Druids who came to Wiltshire in the 9th century BC really came from northern or northwestern Greece, Thrace, then they must have belonged to a religion that worshipped the sacred oak, knew of gates to the other world, and honored a horse god like Rhesus, or the Thracian rider god. They probably believed they were descended from the underworld god whom Julius Caesar called Dis Pater. Influenced by figures like Aristeas and Abaris, who were said to travel miraculously, they might have held beliefs in soul travel or rebirth. These trance journeys may have been deepened through the use of hemp, as practiced by the Scythians and Thracians. The Druids also seem to have had an interest in astronomy, like the priests of Stonehenge, and perhaps even cooperated with them, since the strongest evidence for early Druid presence in Wiltshire relates to astronomy. King Arthur was not an astronomer, but his name is closely associated with the stars. There are several theories about the origin of his name. C. Scott Littleton and Linda A. Malcor suggest that the name Arthur comes from Lucius Artorius Castor, a Roman commander who brought a cavalry unit made up of Sarmatians to Britain. The Sarmatians were related to the Scythians, and these scholars argue that the Arthur legends came from the stories of Batraz, a hero in the Nart sagas of the Ossetians, an Iranian-speaking people from the North Caucasus. Another theory, proposed by Thomas Green, is that the name Arthur comes from the Brittonic word Arto-Wairos, meaning bear man. In Welsh, the word Arth, bear, often symbolized a warrior. Rachel Bromwich showed that the name Arcturus, Greek for guardian of the bears, and the name of a bright star associated with the Great Bear constellation, was an original and traditional variant of Arthur's name. The name Arcturus suggests northern, stormy qualities, reflected in the Latin phrase Arctoas gentes, meaning peoples of the north. So giving a hero the name Arcturus implied that he was a northern warrior with bear-like traits. Graham Anderson extends the connection between Arthur and Arcturus even further. Around 700 BC, in early agricultural poems, Arcturus is mentioned along with the Boötes constellation. In Works and Days, Hesiod says that when Arcturus rises before the sun, it is time to harvest grapes or prune vines. Anderson notes that the name Arcturus also appears in medieval texts. In the 13th century, John of Howden used the phrase Girum Arthuri, meaning Arthur's circle. As Bromwich also points out, Arcturus was known for its stormy and fierce nature. According to Richard Hinckley Allen, Pliny the Elder called it Horridum Sidus, meaning fearsome star. In a speech from 341 BC, Demosthenes said that ships reaching the Black Sea before Arcturus became visible in the sky were given lower interest rates. The stars rising in the sky coincided with the Roman farmers' sacred purification festival called Lustratio Frugum. Arcturus rose in the east around mid-September and set in the west around mid-February. The mythology surrounding Arcturus is very old. In a fragment attributed to Hesiod, the story of the nymph Callisto is told. Callisto, daughter of Lycaon, joined Artemis's hunting group. After Zeus seduced her, Artemis discovered the truth and turned her into a bear. Callisto gave birth to her son, Arcas, in the mountains. One day, when she entered Zeus's sanctuary, Arcas nearly killed her without realizing she was his mother. To save her, Zeus placed her in the sky and named her the Bear. In another version, Lycaon disrespected Zeus by offering the flesh of his grandson, Arcas, whom he had killed. Zeus overturned the table and named the place Trapezus, meaning table. Arcas was placed in the heavens as a star to protect his mother. Anderson draws a parallel between Arcturus founding a city called Table, Trapezus, and King Arthur building the Round Table to prevent conflict among his knights, both acts representing the replacement of a cursed table with a new sacred gathering place. Arcturus has another notable feature. In a commentary on the astronomical poem Phenomena by Aratus, who lived during the Hellenistic period, Arcturus is described as the driver of the bear wagon. He is said to hold a stick in his right hand called a kalorops, which he uses to guide the bear with his left hand. This kalorops, or calibrops, closely resembles Caliburnus, the name used by Geoffrey of Monmouth for Arthur's legendary sword Excalibur. If Excalibur has Arcadian roots, then the sword and the stone legend might be Scythian in origin. Littleton and Malcor refer to a scene described by Herodotus in which the Scythians offer sacrifices to their war god. In every region's temple, there were sanctuaries built on top of large piles of wood. At the top stood an iron sword, which symbolized the god. Hundreds of wagon loads of wood were added each year. Every year, both animals and prisoners of war were sacrificed. From every 100 prisoners, one was selected, wine was poured over their heads, and they were then cut open into a vessel to collect their blood. This vessel was lifted, and the blood was poured onto the sword. At the same time, the arms and hands of the dead were thrown beside the temple. Much later, around AD 390, Ammianus Marcellinus wrote about the Alans, who lived in the northeastern Black Sea region. He said they had no temple or shrine. Instead, they barbarically worshipped a naked sword stuck into the ground, honoring it as Mars, the god. The most interesting element in the Arthur legend is the cauldron mentioned in the poem The Spoils of An Dubuan, which later turned into the Holy Grail symbol in medieval Arthurian romances. Graham Anderson points out that a Scythian legend recorded by Herodotus shows similarities with the Grail stories. According to Scythian tradition, their first ancestor was Targetius, whose father was Jupiter and whose mother was the daughter of the Borysthenes River. Targetius had 3 sons, Lipoxius, Arpoxius, and the youngest, Coloxius. One day, 4 golden objects fell from the sky: a plow, a yoke, a battle axe, and a cup. When the oldest brother approached them, the objects burst into flames. The same happened with the middle brother. But when the youngest brother came close, the flames disappeared, and he was allowed to take them. After that, the other brothers gave him rule. The golden cup here is equal to the Grail. It can only be taken by someone truly worthy. The idea of sacred objects being given only to a certain hero is more clearly seen in the Nart sagas, written down in the 19th century. In these tales, trials involving a cauldron among the Narts are described. Heroes like Eurismeg, Soslan, and Sosriquo try to win the Nart cauldron called Nartamongai. In one version, each has a small barrel before them. The one who tells the truth sees his barrel overflow 3 times. In another tale, a magical cup flies by itself to the lips of the bravest warrior. In yet another, only a perfect warrior can obtain the cauldron, and that is Batraz. Batraz can either make the cauldron boil just by telling his heroic deeds, or win the ladle by cleaning the cauldron of poison. The idea of a renewing cauldron also appears in Greek mythology. According to a fragment by Hesiod, Medea, daughter of the king of Colchis, makes Jason's father Aeson young again in a golden cauldron. A similar cauldron theme appears in a legend reported by Herodotus about the origins of the Macedonians. In this story, 3 brothers fleeing from Argos, Gawanes, Aripos, and the youngest, Perdiccas, arrive in the city of Libya in northern Macedonia. There, they enter the service of a local king. One takes care of horses, another of oxen, and Perdiccas of sheep. The king's wife cooks for them, and Perdiccas's bread is always twice as big as the others. When the king hears of this strange sign, he considers it a lucky omen, but later wants to drive them away. The brothers ask for their pay. The king points to a beam of sunlight coming from the fireplace and says, "There is your reward." While the other brothers are confused, Perdiccas draws the light with a knife, pulls it 3 times to his chest, and leaves. Anderson compares Gawanes with Gawain in the Arthurian legend. The name Libya is connected with the Greek word libes, cauldron, hinting at the Grail city theme. Gawain's father is Lot. Temenos in Greek means share or land division. In the Scythian myth, the youngest brother gains the golden items. In the Macedonian story, Perdiccas claims the symbolic golden sunlight. In both cases, the youngest son gains power. These events are thought to date to around 700 BC. According to Petazzoni, this legend refers to the ancient sun worship of the Macedonian royal family. Roman historian Livy reports that in 181 BC, King Perseus of Macedonia went with his father Philip V to Mount Haemus, now in Bulgaria, where they dedicated 2 altars to Jupiter and the sun. The doubling of Perdiccas's bread may also symbolize solar power. This motif parallels the magical food bag in the first branch of the Mabinogion and the magical bowl in the story of Lud and Llefelys. Examining the story of Arcturus in the context of ancient star beliefs is also very helpful. One scholar offering an important perspective is Canadian physicist and ancient astronomy scholar F. Graham Miller. In his work, Celestial David and Goliath, Miller argues that the biblical story of David and Goliath is actually a myth about the sky. He claims that David represents the Botus constellation, once known as Arcturus. His sling is Corona Borealis, and Goliath represents the Orion constellation on the other side of the sky. King Saul, who gives David his armor, is associated with the Hercules constellation. A similar structure is found in Irish mythology in the tale of Lugh and Baelor. Baelor has one eye on his forehead and another deadly one at the back of his head. When he opens the back eye, it kills enemies with its gaze. Lugh, using one of his father Aed's lightning bolts, throws it with a sling and kills Baelor by hitting him through the back of the head. Miller notes that there are various versions of the story. In some, the weapon is a spear made by the god's blacksmith, Goibnu, and in others, it is a stone. According to Miller, interpreting the David and Goliath story as a celestial tale begins with axial tilt and precession. The earth spins like a giant top, and due to this wobble, the celestial pole shifts over a 25,800-year cycle. This change made ancient people fear that the sky might fall. Around 11,000 BC, the star closest to the pole was Vega, seen as the supreme god holding up the universe. The Akkadians called it Life of Heaven, and the Assyrians called it Judge of Heaven. By 8000 BC, Vega had moved away from the pole, and this fall likely appeared in sacred texts. For example, Isaiah 14:12 says, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn." Today, Vega is 51 degrees from the celestial pole. The Celts were also among those who feared the fall of the sky. In 335 BC, Celtic envoys negotiating with Alexander the Great reportedly said that they feared nothing except the sky falling on their heads. This statement appears in sources like Strabo and Arrian. Such fear of a cosmic collapse represents a real anxiety, also confirmed by Livy. Miller argues that the fear of the sky falling is reflected in a rock carving from the 1st millennium BC in the Camonica Valley in northern Italy. This carving shows a horned and tall figure with its hands raised. On its right arm is a neck ring, torque. On the left side, a ring or circle, and just below the arms is a snake. According to Miller, this figure may represent an ancient constellation known as Menat, formed from a combination of Hercules and Ophiuchus. Mackcana suggests the figure is the horned god Cernunnos. The snake in the left hand is identified with the constellation Serpens Caput, west of Ophiuchus. The torque on the right arm often appears as a magical item in Celtic iconography. The ring on the left side is linked to Corona Borealis. Miller says the raised hands of Cernunnos show the Orans posture, a prayer position, suggesting the figure is holding up the sky. According to Mircea Eliade, Siberian shamans believed the branches of sacred birch trees reached the stars and that these trees supported the sky. Likewise, the horns of Cernunnos might symbolize carrying the heavens. Around 8000 BC, the celestial pole was located right between the raised arms of Hercules. So, the idea of Cernunnos as a sky-bearing god may go back to this period. As procession continued, the representation of the horned figure shifted to the Botas constellation, where it became known as Lugh. Miller says the Gundestrup cauldron also offers clues about old sky beliefs. On 4 panels of the cauldron, busts of gods with raised hands appear. Most or all of them may represent Hercules figures derived from the Menat constellation that supports the heavens. One panel includes a wheel, which Miller interprets as Corona Borealis. The most famous panel of the Gundestrup cauldron, Plate A, shows the horned figure. Miller thinks this represents the Botas constellation, while the surrounding figures stand for neighboring constellations. Despite artistic interpretation, the positions are accurate. Ursa Major is turned toward the horned figure to show loyalty. Starting from the lower right and moving clockwise, these constellations can be identified: Leo, Hydra, Boots, Hercules Donkey, Ursa Minor, Delphinus, and Capricornus. When compared with Botas, the central figure's leg position and the torque on its right arm align with Corona Borealis. This torque also represents Lugh's sling. Miller says Balor does not appear in the Gundestrup cauldron, but symbolic traits of Balor, such as the single eye, blindness, a weapon piercing the head, must be searched for in other constellations. Orion is the only constellation known for blindness. Its head is represented only by the Mesa star, which is dim and sometimes invisible to the naked eye, making Orion seem blind or headless. Astrologically, Balor may be identified with Orion. That leaves the question: what is the weapon thrown at Goliath or Balor? Miller suggests these weapons may have been inspired by meteor showers. Meteors were imagined by people as lightning, spears, glowing swords, or half-drawn blades. Every year at certain times, meteor showers appear to come from specific constellations, named after the constellation that holds the radiant point. Among all constellations, only 3 have both a mythological hero's name and are sources of meteors. One is Perseus, but it's excluded because it is identified with Mithra. That leaves Hercules and Orion. But Orion is never visible during the Herculoid meteor shower because the sun is too close and its light overpowers Orion. This shows how mythic timing reflects sky reality. Miller says the Bootes constellation is not the source of a major meteor shower, and neither is Corona Borealis. But the Hercules constellation is a meteor source. People in ancient times might have thought that Hercules forged heavenly weapons and gave them to Bootes, who then used Corona Borealis, his sling, to throw them. Around 3000 BC, Orion was visible in the sky from August to October. Bootes would be low in the north and last seen on the western horizon right after sunset on August 4th, in a position to bomb Orion. In this context, the Welsh tale Culhwch and Olwen may be loosely connected. In it, the giant Ysbaddaden throws a third poisoned spear and is hit in the eye by Culhwch. Similarly, in the fourth branch of the Mabinogion, Lo hits a bird with a shot between a bent branch and a string, a faint echo of the Lug and Baelor story. Both stories point to a mythological background related to the sky. For example, Lo can only receive his name with the help of his mother Arianrhod, Corona Borealis, and he must hit his target. Culhwch is associated with pigs, connecting him to the other world, making him seem like a substitute for Arthur. In some versions, people say Arthur wouldn't bother with such minor adventures, suggesting that the Ysbaddaden tale may have originally belonged to Arthur, but was passed to another figure over time. In that case, Arthur or Arcturus could be a celestial counterpart of Lug, a figure whose task is to prevent the fall of the sky and fight enemy stars using the divine sling of Corona Borealis. But in the Mabinogion, he is reduced to just a hero who fights giants or hits a bird to get his name from his mother. At the end of his article, Miller points to the Welsh story that most closely resembles the David and Goliath, or Lugh and Baelor tale, Culhwch and Olwen. Here, the giant Ysbaddaden has 3 poisoned spears. On the first night, he throws a spear at Bedwyr, who catches it and throws it back, wounding the giant's knee. On the second night, he throws it at Menw, who drives it into the giant's chest. On the third night, the giant says, "Don't throw at me again or you will die," and tells his servants to keep his eyebrows from falling into his eyes. At that moment, Culhwch throws the spear into his eye, and it exits from the back of his head. This clearly reflects the story of Baelor being struck in the eye. In this study, we have tried to show that the mound people who lived in the Wiltshire region in the 9th century BC may have come from Eastern Europe, using British legends, archaeology, Thracian and Greek religion and mythology, and ancient astronomical beliefs. This migration likely followed the amber route from Thrace through Hyperborea to the Baltic and Western Germany, or the Thraco-Cimmerian migration route from Thrace to Hungary, Austria, Switzerland, and eastern France. But what language did these people speak? Perhaps a lost Eastern or Central European language like Thracian or Illyrian, or a Western European one like Ligurian, spoken in northwestern Italy and southeastern France. Maybe even an Indo-Iranian language. One clue is the name of the river near Stonehenge, Avon. This name appears elsewhere in England and is usually seen as Celtic in origin. Matasevich relates it to Old Irish Ibi or Ob, Middle Welsh Afon, Gaulish Ambe, and even older words like Hittite Hapa, river, Sanskrit Apa, water, ancient Greek aperos, shore, and Latin amnis, stream. As we saw in Chapter 3, the Zoroastrian deity Varuna lost his role and became Apam Napat, meaning descendant of the waters. So the river near Stonehenge may have been named for a much older god, long before the Celts arrived. We also suggested that the Druids settled in Wiltshire before the Celts, and arrived during the same period as the people who brought all Canning's Cross pottery. Their respect for oak trees may link them to ancient Illyrians at Dodona. Their interest in doorways may connect them to early Greek, Roman, or Etruscan traditions, and their burial customs may resemble those of Indian, Iranian, and Greek death cults. Their belief in reincarnation could have the same roots as those used by Pythagoras. Most importantly, we showed that the Arthur or Arcturus story may have Eastern or Central European origins, and could have begun as part of an ancient star myth that goes back thousands of years. But we must not forget that Arthur's story is not only mythological, it also belongs to a historical period after the Roman army left Britain, and we will explore the real Arthur in the next section. Before we move on to the historical Arthur, we must review all the evidence we gathered about the origins of the Mound people and the Druids, and consider new data that may be relevant. One of the first clues comes from an unexpected source: the story Culhwch and Olwen, discussed in Chapter 1. In this tale, Arthur's men must find Mabon ap Modron, and to do so, they must ask very old animals. First, they ask the blackbird of Tilgrai, who doesn't know but sends them to the stag of Redinvre. The stag cannot help either, but points to the owl of Tiogwem Caulwyd. The owl also doesn't know, but directs them to the eagle of Gwern Abwy. The eagle, too, knows nothing, but refers them to the salmon of Lyn Lu, who finally says that Mabon is imprisoned in Gloucester. This oldest animal motif is not unique to Culhwch and Olwen. In a fragment attributed to Hesiod, it is said that the crow lives as long as 9 human lifetimes, the deer lives 4 times longer than the crow, the raven 3 times longer than the deer, the palm tree 9 times longer than the raven, and the fairies live 10 times longer than the palm tree. West states that these lines were frequently quoted in late antiquity and translated many times into Latin, so someone with a classical education would likely have known them. However, he points to a striking similarity that cannot be explained only by classical education or horizontal cultural transmission: a passage from India's great epic, the Mahabharata. In this passage, the royal priest Indradyumna falls from the sky and realizes that no one remembers him. He asks the wise Markandeya if he knows him. Markandeya does not, but suggests an owl who lives in the Himalayas and is older than him. They go there. The owl also doesn't remember, but points to a crane living by a lake. The crane does not know either, but directs them to a turtle living in the lake, who is even older. The turtle is summoned, and after a long reflection, he remembers the priest, as this man had once built altars on his back. The connection between Britain and ancient India is strengthened further by the poem, The Spoils of Anatolian. As mentioned in Chapter 3, the tumulus fortress called Caer Sidi is related to the concept of Sadas in Vedic Sanskrit. More importantly, the phrase Caer Pedruan, four-peaked or four-cornered fortress, can be linked with the four-cornered Varuna in Zoroastrianism and the four-directioned, lightning-wielding Varuna or Indra Varuna figure in the Rigveda. Another poem attributed to Taliesin, the song before the sons of Lir, includes the word distributor, which reinforces the connection, as Varuna in Indo-Iranian traditions is sometimes known as Bhaga. As mentioned in Chapter 6, Varuna was known as grandson of the waters in both Indian and ancient Persian beliefs, providing an alternative etymology for the Avon River near Wiltshire. According to Khazanas, Varuna is the king of the gods, like Odin in Asgard or Zeus on Mount Olympus. He represents not only the sky, but a pervasive essence or existence. As a moral deity, he establishes laws at all levels of creation and governs the universe through Maya, his mysterious wisdom or boundless power. From his golden palace, he sees all and has watchers everywhere. He binds the guilty, but also saves and grants victory in war. Although post-Vedic texts associate him only with water, his earlier role was much broader. Varuna often forms a trio with Mitra and Aryaman. Varuna and Mitra are both called Samraja, supreme rulers, and guardians of cosmic order. Some hymns associate Varuna with night and Mitra with day. Mitra is the son of the day, linked with friendship and agreements. In the Iranian sacred text Avesta, the supreme god is Ahura Mazda, a figure similar to Varuna in both moral aspect and sovereignty. The power of light, however, is assigned to Mitra. All these connections suggest that the origin of Britain may lie in an Indo-Iranian past. This does not conflict with the legends claiming Brutus came from Troy, because Indo-Iranian peoples may have once lived north of the Black Sea and around the Danube River. From Britain's perspective, these regions are not far from northwest Anatolia. Another element that supports this idea is Pokorny's view. He claims the word Prytany comes from the Indo-Iranian words Pratana or Partara. In that case, the character Pryderi in the Mabinogion is actually a warrior figure, and Britain becomes defined as the land of warriors. If these warriors truly settled in Britain, they must have also been concerned with more everyday things. For example, the granite hills in the Dartmoor region are called Tor, which, as H.W. Bailey notes, is related to Sanskrit Torana, arch, gate, or the Totnes word Torah. These words come from a root meaning to place upon, or to surround. Such distant migrations might seem unrealistic, but Beeks argues that the Etruscans of Italy migrated from northwest Anatolia in the 12th century BC. Around the same time, their Lydian brothers moved south to what is now the Manisa and Izmir region. While famine, war, and internal unrest were dominating the eastern Mediterranean, it is very likely that large-scale migrations took place, and some of these people may have reached as far as Britain. One final piece of evidence comes from Elodoris's story, recorded by Giraldus Cambrensis after his travels in Wales. The Tumulus people. Elodoris encountered perform no public worship, but are described as lovers and respecters of truth. This may be a description of the ideal society, such as those found in Plato's Republic or Augustine's City of God. According to Plato, a society should be ruled by philosophers, lovers of truth. But Plato's works were not well known among 12th century Western European scholars. Augustine refers to Plato in City of God and argues that if the philosopher truly loves truth, he will also love God. So Elodoris's legend may actually reflect something else. Giraldus says these people never swore oaths, which rules out a connection with the Thracian figure of Hermes. The Tumulus people's devotion to truth may be linked with the concept of RTA and the god Varuna. When James Hastings examines RTA as a moral order, he says it is undoubtedly of Indo-Iranian origin and dates back at least to the 15th century BC. According to him, this idea developed even before the Vedic Aryans settled in India. The gods are not only born from RTA, but they follow it, enforce it, and know it. The special protector of RTA is Varuna, the great moral overseer who discerns right from wrong, as previously stated in Zoroastrian belief. Varuna's counterpart is Ahura Mazda. Mazda means mind, wisdom, and is related to the Sanskrit Medha. Its adjective form, Medhira, meaning wise, is used for Varuna. In this light, the name Puel, the ruler of the otherworld and husband of the horse goddess Rhiannon, meaning mind, soul, reason, is significant. This links him to Mazda and to the master magician Math in the fourth branch. In Zoroastrianism, the counterpart of RTA is Asha or Arta, and its opposite is Drudge. According to John Waterhouse, Drudge, or lie, is an enemy that corrupts a person from within and is the main enemy of truth. Opposed to Asha, Druj represents the falsehood of old gods and was identified with the demon Ahriman, especially during the Achaemenid period. Herodotus writes that the Persians taught their children only 3 things between the ages of 5 and 20: to ride a horse, shoot a bow, and tell the truth. The greatest disgrace was to lie. Surprisingly, the word Druj may be found in England and Wales. W.H. Matthews, in Mazes and Labyrinths, explores the link between Troy and Labyrinths. Geoffrey of Monmouth writes in The History of the Kings of Britain that Brutus, descendant of Aeneas who escaped from Troy, founded a city in Britain called New Troy. This name was probably associated with the tribe Trinovantes. However, Matthews suggests a deeper meaning behind the connection between the Troy myth and Britain. Matthews studies turf labyrinths all over England. These labyrinths are known by various names: Mizmaze, Julian's Bower, Troy Town, or Shepherd's Race. For example, Julian's Bower is in Alkborough, Lincolnshire, Mizmaze is in Braemore, Hampshire, and another is on St. Catherine's Hill near Winchester. A farm near Dorset called Troy Town preserves the memory of a now-vanished labyrinth near Dorchester. In the rock-cliff marshes of Cumbria lies another labyrinth called the Walls of Troy. There is a Troy town near Somerton, Banbury, in Oxfordshire. In Surrey, between Guildford and Farnham, a Troy town was long known among the people. Matthews also mentions a common custom among Welsh shepherds. They would draw labyrinth-like figures on the grass called cerdroia, resembling the walls of Troy. In northern Europe, stone labyrinths instead of turf ones are found, often named Trojaborg or Troborg, again referencing Troy. Matthews believes the name Troy Town has ancient origins. In a French account of a pilgrimage to Jerusalem in 1418, Seigneur de Caumont stops in Crete and notes a structure built by Daedalus. This structure was called the Labyrinth and was popularly known as the City of Troy. The link between Troy and the Labyrinth goes back much further. An Etruscan vase found in Tagliatella depicts a traditional circular labyrinth with horse riders inside, and the word Truia carved into the center. This artist clearly equated the labyrinth with the city of Troy. The motif of the oldest animal is not unique to Culhwch and Olwen. In a fragment attributed to Hesiod, it is said that the crow lives as long as 9 human lifespans. The deer lives 4 times longer than the crow, the raven 3 times longer than the deer, the date palm 9 times longer than the raven, and the fairies 10 times longer than the date palm. West notes that these verses were often quoted in late antiquity and translated many times into Latin, and therefore likely known by someone with a classical education. However, he points to a striking similarity that cannot be explained only by classical education or horizontal cultural transmission. A section in India's great epic, the Mahabharata. In this work, the royal priest Indradyumna falls from the heavens and realizes that no one remembers him. He asks the sage Markandeya if he knows him. Markandeya does not, but suggests an owl living in the Himalayas who is older than him. They go there. The owl does not remember him either, but points to a crane by a lake. The crane also does not know him, but says that a turtle living in the lake is even older. The turtle is summoned and, after long thought, recognizes the priest. For this man once built altars on his back. The connection between Britain and ancient India becomes stronger in the poem The Spoils of Anwen. As mentioned in Chapter 3, the mound fortress, Kair Siddhi, is associated with the concept of sadhas in Vedic Sanskrit. More importantly, the phrase Kair Pedruan, four-peaked or four-cornered fortress, can be explained through the Zoroastrian four-cornered Varuna and the Rigveda's four-directional lightning-wielding figure, Varuna, or Indra Varuna. Another poem attributed to Taliesin, the song before the sons of Lir, includes the term dispenser, which reinforces this link, as in Indo-Iranian traditions, Varuna is sometimes referred to as Bhaga. As noted in Chapter 6, Varuna is known in both Indian and ancient Persian beliefs as the child of the waters, offering an alternate etymology for the Avon River in Wiltshire. According to Khazanas, Varuna is the king of the gods, much like Odin in Asgard or Zeus on Olympus. He represents not only the sky, but an all-encompassing essence or presence. As a moral god, he lays down laws at every level of creation and rules the universe through Maya, that is, his mysterious wisdom or boundless power. From his golden palace, he sees everything and has watchers everywhere. He binds the sinful, but also redeems and brings victory in battle. Although later texts associated him only with water, his earlier roles were much broader. Varuna often forms a trio with Mitra and Aryaman. Varuna and Mitra are both called Samraja, universal kings, and are the guardians of cosmic order. According to some hymns, Varuna is associated with night, while Mitra is with day. Mitra, the son of the day, is linked to friendship and agreements. In Iran's holy book, the Avesta, the highest god is Ahura Mazda, a figure similar to Varuna in both moral and sovereign aspects. The power of light is attributed to Mitra. All these connections suggest that the origins of Britain might lie in an Indo-Iranian past. This does not contradict the legends claiming Brutus came from Troy, because Indo-Iranian peoples may have once lived north of the Black Sea and around the Danube River. From Britain's perspective, these regions are not far from northwest Anatolia. Another element supporting this theory is Pokorny's view. He claims that the word Prytany derives from the Indo-Iranian words Pratana or Partara. In this case, the character Praetari in the Mabinogion is actually a warrior figure, and Britain is described as the land of warriors. If these warriors truly settled in Britain, they must have dealt with ordinary aspects of daily life too. For example, the word Tor for the granite hills of Dartmoor may be related, as H.W. Bailey points out, to the Sanskrit word Torana, arch, gate, or the Khotanese word Torah. These words come from a root meaning to place on, to surround. Such distant migrations may seem unrealistic, but Beeks suggests that the Etruscans in Italy migrated from northwest Anatolia in the 12th century BC. At the same time, their Lydian brothers went south to what is now Manisa and Izmir. While famine, war, and unrest ruled the eastern Mediterranean, large-scale migrations likely occurred, and these people could have reached as far as Britain. One last piece of evidence is the story of Elodoris told by Giraldus Cambrensis after his travels in Wales. The mound people Elodoris meets do not perform public worship, but are described as lovers and reverers of truth. This may simply be a depiction of an ideal society, as found in Plato's Republic or Augustine's City of God. According to Plato, society should be ruled by philosophers, lovers of truth. However, Plato's works were not widely known among Western European scholars in the 12th century. Augustine does refer to Plato in City of God, suggesting that if a philosopher loves truth, he also loves God. Therefore, the Elodoris legend likely refers to something else. According to Giraldus, these people never swear oaths, ruling out any connection to the Thracian Hermes figure. Their dedication to truth may be connected to Varuna and the concept of RTA. When James Hastings analyzed RTA as a moral order, He argued it is undoubtedly of Indo-Iranian origin and dates back to at least the 15th century BC. He suggests this idea developed even before the Vedic Aryans settled in India. Gods are not only born from RTA, but also follow it, enforce it, and know it. Varuna is the special guardian of RTA, the great moral overseer who discerns right from wrong. As mentioned earlier, the Zoroastrian equivalent of Varuna is Ahura Mazda. Mazda means mind, wisdom, and is related to the Sanskrit Meda. The adjective form Medira, meaning wise, is used for Varuna. From this perspective, the name Puel, lord of the otherworld and husband of the horse goddess Rhiannon, means mind, spirit, reason, linking him to Mazda and to Math, the master magician in the fourth branch. In Zoroastrianism, the counterpart of RTA is Asha or Arta, while its opposite is Druj. According to John Waterhouse, Druj, lie, is an enemy that seizes people from within and is the main enemy of truth. Druj, opposed to Asha, represents the falseness of old gods and was identified with the demon Ahriman, especially in the Achaemenid period. Herodotus wrote that Persians taught their children only 3 things between the ages of 5 and 20: to ride horses, to shoot arrows, and to tell the truth. The greatest shame was to lie. The word Druj may unexpectedly appear in England and Wales. In his book Mazes and Labyrinths, W.H. Matthews explores the link between Troy and labyrinths. Geoffrey of Monmouth, in his History of the Kings of Britain, says that Brutus, descendant of Aeneas who fled Troy, founded a city in Britain called New Troy. This name is likely related to a tribe called the Trinovantes, but Matthews suggests the Troy legend holds a deeper meaning. Matthews examines turf labyrinths across England. These labyrinths are known by various names: Mizmaze, Julian's Bower, Troy Town, or Shepherd's Race. For example, Julian's Bower is in Alkborough, Lincolnshire. Mizmaze is in Braemore, Hampshire. Another is on St. Catherine's Hill in Winchester. The name Troy Town survives as a farm name near Dorchester. Another labyrinth, Walls of Troy, is found in the marshes of Rockcliffe, Cumbria. Near Banbury in Oxfordshire, there is a Troy Town in Somerton. A Troy Town was also known in Hilbury, between Guildford and Farnham in Surrey. Matthews mentions a tradition among Welsh shepherds who would draw figures in the grass called cerdroia, shaped like the walls of Troy. In northern Europe, labyrinths made of stones are found and are also called Trojaborg or Troborg, names associated with Troy. Matthews believes the term Troy Town is very old. In a 1418 French account of a journey to Jerusalem, the Seigneur de Caumont stops in Crete and notes about the complex house made by Daedalus, saying, "This structure was called the Labyrinth and was known to the people as the City of Troy." The connection between Troy and the Labyrinth goes much further back. An Etruscan vase from Tagliatella shows a traditional circular labyrinth with mounted figures inside and the word Truia carved within it. The artist clearly identified the labyrinth with the city of Troy. The meaning of the Troy game is explained in Virgil's epic Aeneid. In the 5th book, Aeneas's son Iulus participates in a game called Lusus Troiae with his companions. This game is a kind of ceremonial parade or dance in which some participants ride horses. Virgil compares these complex movements to the winding paths of the Cretan labyrinth. On High Crete, the ancient labyrinth within walls was filled with countless and bewildering ways, a chaos that disappeared as the feet moved forward. However, Virgil is not the first to mention this ceremonial dance. In Book 18 of the Iliad, while describing Achilles' shield, Homer says the lame god, Hephaestus, crafts a decorated dance floor on a wide area in Crete, similar to the one Daedalus made for Ariadne. On this floor, young men and women dance while holding hands. Some form circles with joy, while others walk in turns. This ceremonial dance continued even after Homer. According to the story, after Theseus kills the deadly Minotaur, he escapes Crete with his Athenian companions and reaches Delos. There, they celebrate their victory with songs and dance. This victory dance is called the Crane Dance, Geranos. Plutarch, in Parallel Lives, describes this dance. After Theseus leaves Crete, he stops at Delos. Here, he and his companions perform a dance. This dance is performed with orderly movements that imitate the winding paths of the Cretan labyrinth. The people of Delos still perform this dance and call it the Crane Dance. Matthews discusses several possibilities regarding the origin of the word Troy in the expression Troy Town. According to him, the name may not directly refer to a city, but might come from a very ancient root, meaning to turn or to twist. He also connects the name Troy to the Persian myths Druja or Drauga and the Rigveda term Dra. The first proposal derives the word Troy from the Welsh tro, which is linked to the Indo-European root trach. This root is found in Latin traho, Old Irish trag, Welsh trode, Old Irish tragud, Welsh treo, Welsh tro, turn, time, and Welsh Troy. The English word drag also comes from this root. Another interpretation of this theme is by Henning Eichberg, who, while discussing stone-paved labyrinths in Northern Europe, connects the German word drehen with the English word throw. However, the proposal that interests us the most is the one connecting druja and dru. Pokorny derives these words from the Indo-European root draug dash. This root has led to many words such as the Avestan druj iti, lies, deceptions, Sanskrit drega and dreha, Avestan draoga, lie, Old Persian drauga, Sanskrit drua, Old High German triogen, to deceive, Old Norse drauger, ghost, draumer, Old High German trom, Old English drem, and Modern English dream. This brings us back to Elodoris's tale of the Mound people and their devotion to truth. It also reminds us of the Zoroastrian concepts of Asha and its opposite Druj. If a group of Iranian-speaking people indeed settled in southern England, what did deception, demons, and perhaps labyrinths mean to them? Dennis Price suggests that Stonehenge was once a labyrinth, and that the name Dance of the Giants, given by Geoffrey of Monmouth, reflects the site's connection to music and dance. Any ancient visitor who saw Stonehenge, a structure from the Stone Age, would probably have heard of it and interpreted it according to their beliefs, perhaps calling it the work of demons or a deceptive place. Another story suggesting that the ancestors of the Mound people were ancient comes from the tale of the Cauldron of Rebirth in the second branch of the Mabinogion. As remembered, this cauldron is taken by Bran from Lasar Laius Gifawid and his wife Simide Kimainvol, who fled from the Iron House in Ireland to Wales. According to the tale, one day, while the King of Ireland is hunting on a mound by a lake, a giant man carrying a cauldron on his back and an even bigger woman emerge from the lake. King Mathaluch hosts them, but the couple harms those around them and earns the people's hatred. Since the Irish cannot drive them away, they trap them in an iron room and heat it with coal to force them out. Eventually, the couple escapes to Wales with the cauldron. According to Barry Cunliffe, the first bronze cauldrons in Britain appeared at the end of the 2nd millennium BCE due to connections with Central Europe. At the beginning of the 1st millennium BCE, Ireland became a center for producing these cauldrons, which might explain why the Cauldron of Rebirth comes from Ireland. Although little is said about Lasar's origins, A detail in the third branch draws attention. When Pryderi, Manawydan, and their wives go to England to work, Manawydan begins crafting sword hilts and paints them in the style of Lasar using deep blue. This suggests that the name Lasar might derive from the Persian word lajvard, hinting at an Iranian connection. Also, a similarity is drawn between Bran's cauldron and the cauldron of Medea, queen of Colchis on the Black Sea coast. Many of the claims regarding Eastern or Central European origins are based on the connection between the horse sacrifice at Danebury and the horse goddess Rhiannon, and similarly on the association between Rhesus in Homer's Iliad and the Thracian horse god. At this point, it is worth mentioning the Ashvamedha ritual from the Vedic tradition, which is detailed in the Yajur Veda. This ceremony could only be held by a king. A standing stallion was anointed with purified oil and decorated with gold ornaments. Then the animal was sacrificed. 3 queens circled it while chanting hymns. The chief queen symbolically enacted sexual union with the dead stallion, and the other queens spoke ritually obscene words. The chief queen spent the night beside the stallion, and the next day, the animal was cut into pieces and cooked. If the ancestors of the Mound people were of Indo-Iranian origin, what about the Druids? The word Druid is said to be Celtic and to mean oak priests, but other origins are also possible. In Sanskrit, Dhruva means eternal. In this case, Druids might be sages of eternity. Also, as we have seen, Dru means demon or deception, making them knowers of demons, or those who see lies, those who can distinguish deceit. But the most convincing etymology defines Druids as gatekeepers, those who know the gateway to the other world. This other world may be the underworld common in Southern English religions, or a celestial afterlife related to the star god Arcturus. As seen in the poem The Spoils of Anwn, this other world exists both underground and in the skies, and the Druids hold the key to the gate between both realms. The connection between Druids and gates gives new meaning to the previously examined poem line, "Who is the gatekeeper?" Perhaps this refers to Arthur's quest to cross into the other world. At least at the beginning of the poem, Arthur is implied to be invisible. Druids are famously believed to have believed in reincarnation. We mentioned that Jan Bremer argued that Pythagoras' doctrine of transmigration had Greek, not Indian, origins. But Thomas Machiavelli offers a different view. He argues that the similarities between Greek and Indian beliefs about reincarnation are so numerous that they must have stemmed from a shared source. For example, on vegetarianism, the Sicilian-born Greek philosopher Empedocles said to meat-eaters, "Do you not see that you are thoughtlessly eating one another?" In the Indian tradition, the first man, Manu, said, "The one whose meat I eat in this life will eat my meat in the next." Machiavelli also notes that both Greeks and Indians shared the idea of liberating knowledge. This knowledge is not ordinary mental comprehension, but an understanding that makes the inaudible audible, the imperceptible perceptible, the unknowable knowable. According to Machiavelli, the Orphics believed that salvation came from remembering one's divine nature. They believed we could understand the universe not just by observing it, but by aligning ourselves with its harmony. In his Timaeus, Plato similarly wrote, "The movements that are most fitting for the divine part within us are the thoughts and movements of the universe. Therefore, everyone should introduce their corrupted mental movements to the harmonies of the cosmos and make the natural structure of the mind resemble that of the universe." Machiavelli believes this line of thought goes back to the Bronze Age Mesopotamia. By 2000 BCE, the universe in Mesopotamia was already being imagined as a vast human-shaped being. In a poem describing how Inanna received kingship from the god Enki, Inanna describes her growing power using such cosmic imagery. He made the heavens a crown for my head, the earth sandals for my feet. Towards the end of the Bronze Age, the storytelling style that focused on individual gods gave way to a universal body metaphor in which gods merged as one. In a Babylonian hymn written around 1000 BCE, gods are described as different aspects of Marduk. Ninurta is Marduk with a digging tool, Nergal is Marduk attacking, Zababa is Marduk in hand-to-hand combat, Enlil is Marduk leading, Nabium is Marduk keeping records, Sin is Marduk lighting the night, Shamash is Marduk as justice, and Adad is Marduk bringing rain. In the later part of his sermon, Gildas criticizes 5 Britons for living sinful lives: Constantine, king of Dumnonia, Aurelius Caninus, Vortiporius, king of the Demetai, now Deift, Cuneglasus, and Maglocunus. The first important clue comes from the appeal for help made to Aetius. This Roman general fought many battles against the Burgundians, Visigoths, and Alans, and he was consul for the 3rd time in AD 446. The second clue is the name Vortigern. Gildas may not have clearly used this name, but Bede, writing in AD 730 and using Gildas as a source, includes it. The word Vortigern is probably not a personal name, but a title meaning high leader. Gildas's phrase superbus tyrannus might also refer to this name. According to the Powys genealogies, Vortigern ruled Powys around AD 420 to 425 and probably governed from Viraconium. Excavations show that after Roman rule ended, this city was rebuilt. Stone buildings were replaced with wooden ones, often large, symmetrical, and sometimes 2 stories tall with columns. This large complex may have been Vortigern's palace. The third clue is the name Ambrosius Aurelianus. His family was honored with the purple robe. According to Hayam, Ambrosius was probably a distant relative of a noble family from the Western Roman Empire, like the Theodosian dynasty. Castledon sees Ambrosius as part of Celtic aristocracy and suggests that places with names beginning with Ambros were bases of military groups he founded or protected. Some of these bases surrounded the Dobuni region, once known as Calchvinid. Others were in the Lee and Stort valleys to defend London from East Anglian attacks. Castledon says that Myers believed Ambrosius owned land at Amesbury, and that its name was originally Ambresburig. Frank D. Reno identifies Ambrosius with Riothemus, a king of the Britons, mentioned by Gothic historian Jordanus around AD 551. According to Jordanus, Riothemus fought with the Romans against the Visigoth king Euric, lost around AD 470, and later returned to Britain, where he was called Arthas around AD 475. Reno thinks this Arthas came from the Welsh word Ardus, meaning high, and that it was a nickname for Ambrosius. Ambrosius Aurelianus is somewhat like Arthur because he doesn't appear clearly in historical records. His name means golden immortal, which could connect to Arthur in another way. Arcturus is a bright star in the Boötes constellation, and giving Arthur Arcturus the title Golden Immortal would make sense. Also, linking Ambrosius to Amesbury might connect him to families that controlled the Salisbury Plain before the Roman era. The Historia Brittonum seems to include at least 2 different stories about Ambrosius. In chapter 31, Nennius writes that while Vortigern was king, the Britons feared not just the Scots and Picts, but also the Romans and Ambrosius. In chapter 42, it tells of the boy with no father who warned of dragons fighting under Vortigern's castle. This boy was called Ambrose. In chapter 48, Vortigern's son, Passant, is given the lands of Bilth and Gorthyrnion by Ambrosius, who is called the greatest king among the kings of Britain. In chapter 66, it says 12 years passed between Vortigern's rule and the fight between Guitolinus, Vitellinus, and Ambrosius. This took place at Guolapum, also called Cat Gwalaf, near Danebury Hill, just a few kilometers from today's Amesbury. All these details show that Ambrosius was active in Wiltshire or Hampshire, may have fought Vortigern, and became a semi-legendary figure, like Arthur, with both historical and extraordinary traits. The last important clue from Gildas concerns the battle, or siege, of Mons Badonicus. It's hard to know exactly where this battle happened. Possible sites include Badbury Hill near Farringdon in Oxfordshire, Liddington Castle above Badbury Village near Swindon in Wiltshire, and Badbury Rings near Wimborne Minster in Dorset. But this is less likely, since it wasn't on the front line between the Eastern Saxons and Western Britons. Another candidate is Salisbury Hill near Bath, but it's unlikely that Gildas would have used the later Germanic name Aquae Sulis. The date of the battle is also uncertain. Estimates range from AD 480 to 520. Since O'Sullivan dates De Excidio to around 520, it seems likely that the Battle of Badon took place around AD 480. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written around AD 891, says nothing about this battle. But it gives an indirect clue by listing the Bretwaldas, rulers who had authority over other Saxon kingdoms. After Aelle of Sussex, Solon of Wessex is named. Even if the dates aren't reliable, a 50-year gap suggests that Saxon expansion slowed during this time. If we accept that De Excidio was written around AD 520 and the Battle of Badon happened around 480, what was life like in southwestern Britain at the end of the 5th century? Most Roman British towns were probably abandoned by around AD 450 or soon after, and at least some people moved into hill forts. This is confirmed by the history of Cadbury Castle, about 8 kilometers northeast of Yeovil in South Somerset. Cadbury isn't far from the Roman British town of Lyndinis, one of the capitals of the Durotriga tribe. Costin says that Cadbury was re-fortified in the second half of the 5th century and used until the 6th. Its defenses were so large they had no rival in the region. The ramparts, 3,940 feet long, enclosed 18 acres, and over 20,000 meters of timber were used. A large hall on the hilltop suggests high-status people lived there. Mediterranean pottery was found too. A place like Cadbury was probably rebuilt for military use. It faced east and protected against attacks from southeast Somerset. It also became the successor to Ilchester as a center for trade and politics. Cadbury wasn't the only hill fort reused after Roman times. Barbara York says Cadbury Congressbury near Yatton in North Somerset was also refortified. It has more imported pottery than anywhere else in England except Tintagel in Cornwall. Fine metalwork and evidence of large feasts have also been found there. Cannington Hill Fort near Bridgewater in Somerset was also likely reoccupied. A large cemetery nearby dates to this period too. The authority that rebuilt Cadbury and other hill forts may also have built West Wansdyke. York says this is a line of ditches and banks stretching from Mace Knoll south of Bristol to just south of Bath. It was likely built in the 5th or 6th century to resist Saxon expansion into the Kennet Valley. So it's clear that Somerset was still under Briton control during Gildas' time. But what about nearby areas? York says that Bokerley Dyke, on the eastern edge of Cranbourne Chase in Dorset, was also built after Roman times. It controlled traffic from the Roman road Ackling Dyke into the Dorchester area. Between Bokerley Dyke and West Wansdyke, there are natural barriers like Selwood Forest. York sees Selwood, Bokerley Dyke, and West Wansdyke as agreed borders between Britons and Saxons. West Wansdyke isn't the only earthwork from this time. East Wansdyke runs for 24 kilometers from Morgan's Hill near Devizes, across the Marlborough Downs, to just west of Savernick in East Wiltshire. It separates the Kennet Valley from the rest of Wiltshire. It used to be thought that East and West Wansdyke were one structure, but no connection has been found. However, the Roman road from Silchester to Bath links them. Unlike Somerset, there is little evidence of widespread reoccupation of hillforts in the areas south of East Wansdyke. However, there are positive archaeological signs that some defensive structures were repaired, such as at Witsbury Castle near Fordingbridge in East Hampshire. Also, some hillforts turned into large estate centres in the early Middle Ages. According to York, Margaret Gelling studied such examples of settlements. For instance, Essesbury in Oxfordshire and Blueberry in Berkshire are such cases. Gelling argued that there are two kinds of place names: habitational names, referring to structures, and topographical names, which refer to the location of a village but not the buildings themselves. Gelling said topographical names are more common in areas where the English settled very early, and the large estate centres in those regions often have such names. Examples include Lambourne, Blueberry, and Farringdon in Berkshire. There are many documents from before the Norman conquest in this region, which show that some topographical names were later replaced by habitational ones after the 10th century. Gelling used Essesbury, meaning ash tree fortification, as an example of a large estate that was later divided into two. One became Uffington and the other Woolstone. Around Dorchester, in the first half of the 5th century, burial grounds using both cremation and inhumation appeared on both sides of the Upper Thames River and its branches. By the late 5th century, settlement may have expanded into the Whitehorse Valley and the Kennet Valley. This expansion may have triggered the construction of one or both Wansdyke defenses. According to Rousseau, intense settlement around Dorchester actually began in the late 6th century. This growth may be linked to campaigns by Colin, a West Saxon leader, and Bretwalda, against the post-Roman British settlements in the Severn and Chiltern valleys. There is strong evidence that Dorchester became the center of an Anglo-Saxon ruler or noble family at this time. Excavations in the town revealed Byzantine and early Anglo-Saxon gold coins, jewelry, and personal items, dated around 600 to 625 AD. Another noble site from the same time was found in Cuddesdon, 6 miles north of Dorchester. Its rich finds match Dorchester's, and it likely represents a rural royal estate of the same family. Also, one place in this region, probably Dorchester, may have served as a royal center for producing and distributing luxury goods and raw materials. All these archaeological findings suggest that by the early 7th century, Dorchester had become a multifunctional and important center for the Saxons in the Thames Valley, possibly serving as a royal headquarters. The names Cerdic and Cynric still raise questions. The name Cerdic likely comes from the Welsh name Ceredig, which is a later form of Caraticus, the leader of the Catuvalauni who resisted the Roman invasion. Several people in Britain had this name at the time. Matthews mentions a British king named Coroticus, whom St. Patrick cursed, while Reno mentions Ceredic, son of Cunedda, founder of Gwynedd, and a Ceretic who served as translator between Hengist and Vortigern in the Historia Brittonum. Reno suggests this last one may be the same as Cerdic, but their timelines do not match. The name Cynric may mean family ruler in Saxon, but its origin is more likely Brittonic. The name means Hound King and resembles the name of the god Cunomaglus, Hound Lord, worshipped at a Roman temple in Nettleton Shrub. Matthews links the name to the Irish name Cunarix, found in an inscription at Wroxeter. But considering southern England's mythological background, the person was probably a native Briton. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle calls Cerdic and Cynric royal officials, aldermen, suggesting they may have been high-ranking Britons. The Chronicle says Cerdic was not active in southern Hampshire until 534, and Cynric did nothing before 552. Although it says Cerdic became king in 519, Dumville calculated his rule began around 538. This period of silence may reflect the halt in Saxon expansion after the Battle of Mons Badonicus. Interestingly, Cerdic's rise coincides with the year a meteor was seen, and the renewed advance follows a later plague. It's hard to say for sure who Cerdic was, but he clearly had great prestige among later Gewisse, or West Saxon leaders. The most likely explanation is that he was a Briton noble from the Dorchester-on-Thames area who spoke both Celtic and Saxon. He may have been related to the interpreter Ceretic from Vortigern's time, or to the Powys royal. More is known about Cynric. He reportedly took Old Sarum in 552, though York says the Saxons had already settled the area. Cemeteries at Harnham Hill date to around 500, Petersfinger to the 5th century, and Winterbourne Gunner to the 5th to 6th centuries. Cemeteries in Collingbourne-Ducis on Salisbury Plain also date to about 500. In 556, Cynric and Solon captured Baronbury, Barbury Castle, which is on the Ridgeway route south of Swindon. Controlling this hill fort meant securing the route between Oxfordshire and Wiltshire. This suggests Cynric and the Gewisse in Wiltshire had a centre in North Wiltshire, most likely Ramsbury, near the Berkshire border. Ramsbury became a bishop's seat in 909, showing it was a royal estate. It is only 4 miles from the Roman fort of Cunetio. The area had many villas, like those around Bath and Cirencester. According to Haslam, some villas grew in power at the end of the Roman Empire and became centers of authority after the army withdrew. Following Biddle's theory for Winchester, a group of mercenaries might have taken control after replacing the existing order. A military belt buckle found in Cunetio suggests a similar transition happened there. Haslam says such estate centers survived into the 6th century and became natural power bases for anyone trying to control the region. Ramsbury's location, close to Cunetio and along the Kennet Valley Saxon route, makes it a strong candidate as a center of rule. The Bur, fortified place, in Ramsbury's name means it was a defensible settlement. The name means fortified home of the Raven, which connects to Wiltshire's history and Briton mythology. Returning to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Gewisse story continues. In 560, Colin became king. In 568, he and his brother Cutha attacked Kent and drove back Ethelbert, killing 2 rulers. In 571, Cuthalf fought the Britons in Bedford and took 4 settlements before dying. In 577, Ciulin and Cuthwin killed 3 British kings and took Gloucester, Cirencester, and Bath. In 584, Ciulin and Cutha fought the Britons at Fethin League. Cutha died, but Ciulin returned with much treasure. In 591, at Woden's Barrow, Britons were massacred, Ciulin was overthrown, and Ciul ruled for 6 years. It's written that Ciulin became Bretwalda in 560, but the real date is likely around 580. Ciulin may also have had Briton roots. His name resembles Old King Cole, Coel Hen, who was said to be the ancestor of early medieval northern British kings. These kings ruled places like Reged and Elmet, and some like Lywart Hen fled south to Powys. Coel means belief or prophecy in Welsh, and Sel means lucky in Old Irish. So Ciulin may have come from or had ties to the Midlands or north of Britain. All his battles were north of London, and he often fought with people named Cutha, Cuthwine, or Cuthwulf, possibly Saxons, and allied with the kings of Dorchester-on-Thames. The first battle was against Ethelbert of Kent, likely due to a border dispute. The place called Wimbledon is unclear. Earlier theories about Wimbledon are no longer accepted. The Bedford battle is confusing because that area was likely under East Anglian control at the time. But the most striking campaign was the Battle of Dyrham, where Ceawlin took Cirencester, Gloucester, and Bath, killing 3 kings: Conmail, Condida, and Farinmail. Patrick Sims Williams thinks these names match the Welsh names Sinful, Cyndyllan, and Fernfil. 2 of these names don't appear elsewhere, but Cyndyllan is the name of a Briton king who fought with Penda of Mercia against Oswald of Northumbria and died in Shropshire in the 7th century. However, Gloucester didn't stay under Gewissa control for long. By 603, it was part of the Hwicce kingdom. Ceawlin's last battle was at Fethin League, which is thought to be present-day Stoke Line in Oxfordshire. In Swanton's translation of the year 584, the phrase, "and he returned in anger," suggests that Ceawlin lost this battle. It also explains why he lost his throne in 591. The battle may have taken place at Woden's Barrow, now called Adam's Grave, in Wiltshire. This suggests there may have been a civil war between the Gewissa group in Wiltshire and the one in Oxfordshire. After Ceawlin, Cutha's son Ceol became leader of the Gewissa around 591 or 592. The origin of the name Ceol is unclear, but it may come from Brittonic roots. In Old Irish, similar words mean hostage, word, or to obey. This could mean Ceol was a sub-king loyal to the kings of Dorchester-on-Thames. Ceol ruled for only 5 or 6 years, and in 597 he was replaced by his brother Ceolwulf. The name Ceolwulf contains wolf, meaning wolf, which appears Germanic, but it might also relate to the Old Irish word olc, meaning wild or evil. This also suggests Ceolwulf might have been a sub-king under Dorchester. This raises questions about names like Cutha, Cuthwine, and Cuthwulf. Were they really Saxon? The name Cutha may be linked to the goddess Cuda, found in a relief at Cirencester. Cuda was connected to prosperity and fertility. We know little about the time of Ceol and Ceolwulf. After them, Cynegils became king in 611, though his exact relation to them is unknown. The name Cynegils is Brittonic and matches the tyrant Cuneglas, mentioned in Gildas de Excidio Britanniae. Cun may mean dog, and glass means a bluish-gray color. The name is similar to Cunorix, which suggests Cynegils came from the same Wiltshire line as Cynric. Cynegils is said to have fought a battle in 614 at Biundun with his Saxon ally Cuichelm, killing 2,046 Britons. This location may be Bindon in Devon. Cynegils and Cuichelm also fought King Penda of Mercia at Cirencester, and Penda likely won. 2 major outcomes came from these wars. The Gewissa were pressured by Mercia and began expanding to the south and west. This pressure may explain why Cynegils and Cuichelm converted to Christianity in the 630 and founded a bishopric at Dorchester-on-Thames. Oswald, king of Bernicia, became their godfather and likely their ally. However, Cynegils' son, Cenwalh, did not support his father's acceptance of Christianity. Cenwalh's name is also thought to be Brittonic, possibly from Cunovalus, meaning strong dog. According to Bede, Cenwalh refused baptism and divorced his wife, who was the sister of Penda of Mercia. As a result, Penda exiled him. While in exile with King Anna of East Anglia, a Christian, Cenwalh accepted Christianity and around 650 became king of the Gewissa. From then on, expansion to the south and west sped up. In 652, Cenwalh defeated the Britons at Bradford upon Avon, and in 658 he won another victory at Penselwood in eastern Somerset. This gave him control over eastern Dumnonia. Around the same time, he also took parts of Dorset and was remembered as the first Saxon patron of Sherborne Abbey. Around 660, Cenwalh founded a bishopric in Winchester, likely because control of Dorchester-on-Thames was lost. There were many reasons to make Winchester the second bishopric for the Guhuism. Dorchester-on-Thames was no longer safe because of Mercian pressure. Winchester was farther from Mercia, closer to the Jute and Brittonic kingdoms the Guis wanted to conquer, near traditional centers like Salisbury Plain, and already had a settled Saxon population. In Roman times, Winchester, Venta Belgarum, was the capital of the Belgi tribe, and it probably included Salisbury Plain in its territory. According to Rousseau, by the end of the 4th century, new buildings in Venta had stopped. Its cemeteries were no longer used after 420, and by 450, post-Roman urban life had ended. In the late 5th century, the large pagan cemetery at Kingsworthy showed early Anglo-Saxon presence. Inside the town, the oldest Anglo-Saxon remains are pottery from around 480. Anglo-Saxon records mention Winchester around the mid-7th century, with the founding of the bishopric. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says that in 648, Cenwalh built a church dedicated to Saint Peter in Winchester. At that time, the city was under West Saxon rule and was called a seester. Archaeology shows there was limited settlement in the town center and northeast during the 7th century. There may have been an early Anglo-Saxon palace near the Roman Forum Basilica complex. Excavations show that the southern gate of Roman Winchester was blocked with a ditch, and later a wall in the late 5th or 6th century. People entering from the south had to use the King's Gate, which led to the Forum and the possible palace area. In 1971, at Lower Brook Street, a residential complex was found from the 7th century with gold and agate necklaces and a silver torque. These finds suggest that Saxons had already taken Winchester and its surroundings well before Cenwalh's time. The fact that the bishopric was founded in Winchester and not North Wiltshire tells us something about the Guisa in Wiltshire. Cynric first appears when he took Old Sarum and later fought at Barbary Castle with Ceawlin. This suggests he came from Venta Belgarum, Amesbury, or one of the villages on Salisbury Plain. Why didn't the Wiltshire Guis make Silchester their capital? According to York, some Gallic brooches from 400 to 600 were found in Silchester, and these match items from western Wessex better. But Silchester was too close to Mercia and Essex to be a safe capital. There may also have been a historical reason. The Atrebates tribe may have had past conflict with the powerful families of Salisbury Plain. Cunliffe says that Berry Hill in Hampshire was fortified by the Atrebates around 100 BC. Around the same time, Danebury was abandoned. This may mean the Atrebates took over land once ruled by older elites from Salisbury Plain. What happened to the old rulers of Wiltshire and Hampshire? Those in the north may have gone to Gloucestershire in Dobunni lands, but later returned to North Wiltshire after the Roman conquest. That's because both areas were wealthy and ruled by refined elites during Roman times. Those from the south may have taken refuge in hill forts, like Cadbury Castle in Somerset. Later, after the division of Atrebatic lands among Atrebates, Regnenses, and Belgae, they may have returned. The capital chosen was Venta Belgarum, Winchester. Given the past rivalry between the old rulers of Salisbury Plain and the Atrebates, the Guisa may have left Caleva Atrebatum, Silchester, to get revenge on their old enemies. All of this gives us important clues about what happened in southern England between AD 400 and 600. It seems that two groups were fighting for power. Ambrosius, the leader of the Wiltshire group, was against hiring Germanic mercenaries. Vortigern, head of the Viraconium group, welcomed help from the Saxons. Ambrosius was probably Christian and supported by the old families who had ruled Wiltshire and East Hampshire for centuries. Still, later legends praised him as Arcturus or Arthur. It's likely that the figure of Arcturus or Arthur became popular after the comet of AD 539 and the plague that followed. Arcturus may have been a figure from Wiltshire Druids, perhaps another name for the Thracian rider Rhesus, the Thracian Hermes, or the god Lugus who held up the sky. Arcturus was a hero who could deal with events in the sky and destroyed giants with meteor showers, just like the deaths of Goliath, Balor, or Isbadadden. Druids, who had survived centuries of Roman oppression, cared deeply about observing the sky. The comet and plague were big signs to them, just like the disasters after volcanic eruptions in 1628 and 1159 BC. So, to unite the people, they told the story of Arcturus or Arthur. But Arcturus or Arthur couldn't stop the Saxons. So at least one elite from the old rulers of Wiltshire and East Hampshire decided to ally with the Saxons. This created a new kingdom that protected their own power and the ancient people of southern England. This decision seems to have been very successful because the capital of the Kingdom of Wessex became Winchester, which was very close to the old centers of power like Salisbury Plain and Danebury. While Arthur Arcturus was fighting legendary battles, the Wiltshire Gewis were fighting real wars, both against the Saxons who threatened them and against Britons who disagreed with their ideas about the future of southern England. Eventually, when the Danes destroyed Northumbria and East Anglia and split Mercia in two in the 890s, Wessex under King Alfred became the only real kingdom of England, and from the 10th century until the Norman conquest in 1066, it became the center of a united England. But there is an interesting detail that shows Wessex kings never forgot their roots. In 979, Queen Dowager Elfthryth founded the monastery of St. Mary and St. Mellor in Amesbury. It was dedicated to St. Mellor because of the relics kept there. Mellor was a Breton saint with a meaningful story. His uncle Rywal had killed Maelor's father, St. Melio, and wanted to kill Maelor too, who was only 7 years old. But when a council of bishops convinced him not to kill the child, Rywal cut off Maelor's right hand and left foot, replacing them with a silver hand and a bronze foot. The silver hand links Maelor to Nodens, also called Lud and Llefelys, an ancient god known at Lydney Park. This shows how deep Wessex royal memory went. This strong memory also explains another curiosity in Wessex history. According to Henry of Huntingdon, at the Battle of Burford in 752, a noble named Edelhun led King Cuthred's army carrying a golden dragon banner. Similarly, in the Bayeux Tapestry scene of the Battle of Hastings, King Harold is shown fighting under a dragon-shaped standard. Was this dragon a response to the Red Dragon of Wales, or did it carry old memories of the comet that marked the kingdom's birth? The descendants of Cerdic and Cynric ruled Wessex and later all of England until 1066. That year, Edward the Confessor died childless, and Duke William of Normandy claimed the throne because Edward's mother, Emma, was William's great-aunt. To strengthen his claim, William invaded England and killed King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle writes that a comet appeared before the 14th day of the May Calends, suggesting the end of Wessex happened like its beginning. After 1066, England became a Norman kingdom, and Anglo-Saxon nobles were removed. Some were imprisoned in Normandy or monasteries, Others, like Edgar the Atheling, who briefly claimed the throne, and his sisters Margaret and Christina, fled to Scotland. Some, like Harold's mother, Geitha, and the Earl of Northumbria, Gospatric, escaped to Flanders. William took their lands and gave them to Norman lords. According to Daniel, by the time of the Domesday Book in 1086, almost all Anglo-Saxon nobles had lost their lands. According to Daniel, the years between 1080 to 1120 were the hardest for Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. But during King Henry I's reign, their prestige began to return. Henry I married Matilda, daughter of Margaret and niece of the last Anglo-Saxon king Edgar the Atheling. Matilda showed interest in her West Saxon roots, asked monks from Malmesbury for her family tree, and was eventually buried next to Edward the Confessor in Westminster Abbey. After the Norman conquest, Anglo-Saxon culture was in great danger, but the monasteries preserved their traditions and kept the culture alive. As Daniel noted, one of the most important works of the 12th century was Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia. A key political element in these legends was the belief that Arthur did not die and would return to defeat tyrants. That's why the name Arthur became a powerful symbol for rebels. One prince even took the name Arthur of Brittany. He was Richard I's nephew and grandson of Henry II. Interest in Arthur grew further with excavations in Glastonbury. There, monks claimed they had found Arthur's grave and body, along with a coffin with an inscription. King Henry II supported these excavations and used legends of Arthur conquering Ireland to justify his own invasion of Ireland. From all of this, we might think that the ancient families who ruled Salisbury Plain lost their power completely. But the Wessex dynasty did not disappear. King Henry I married Matilda, the niece of the last Anglo-Saxon king, and their daughter, also Matilda, married Geoffrey of Anjou and became the mother of Henry II, the first king of the Plantagenet dynasty. Interestingly, the name Plantagenet means broom plant and reminds us of the material Math and Gwydion used to create Blodwed, Lu's unfaithful wife, in the fourth branch of the Mabinogion. Winchester remained the capital of Wessex and stayed a center of power for a long time. According to Daniel, when King Henry I came to the throne, the royal treasury was still in Winchester. But in 1141, during the civil war between Matilda and the usurper, Stephen of Blois, Winchester was partly destroyed by fire and was only rebuilt in the 14th century. Meanwhile, Wilton, which became the administrative capital of Wiltshire in the 8th century, kept growing. According to the Domesday Book, the nunnery of Benedictine women at Wilton became the richest of its kind in England. Another key town in the area was Malmesbury, located in northwest Wiltshire near an old Roman temple in Nettleton Shrub. An Iron Age hill fort existed there, and in 656, a Benedictine monastery was founded by Adhelm, nephew of King Aine. King Athelstan was buried there in 941. By the 11th century, it had the second largest library in Europe and was one of the leading centers of knowledge on the continent. But after the Norman conquest, the fate of Wiltshire's nobles can be symbolized by the stories of two religious institutions. As mentioned before, the Benedictine nunnery at Amesbury was founded in 979 and lasted over a century after the conquest. But in 1177, King Henry II, trying to atone for encouraging the murder of Thomas Becket, invited the French Order of Fontevraud to build a mixed monastery at Amesbury. After this, Abbess Beatrice, who had refused a church appointment proposed by Henry and the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1160, was removed, and the English nuns were dismissed. None of them chose to adapt to the new order. Another important religious center in Wessex was Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset. Glastonbury has been inhabited since the Neolithic period. Many wooden trackways stretching south into the Somerset marshes have been found. The oldest and most famous is the Sweet Track, dated to around 3800 BC. According to Koch, the effort required to build it shows Glastonbury was home to a large and organized community. Another track at Mere Heath dates to the 2nd millennium BC, proving the area remained populated in the Bronze Age. Settlements continued in the Iron Age. Around 100 people lived in Glastonbury Lake Village between 300 BC and AD 100. There are few Roman traces, but the holy well in the abbey's Lady Chapel might date to the Roman period. According to Gathercole, legends about Glastonbury may have played an important role during the time between the fall of Roman rule and the rise of Anglo-Saxon power. Even though medieval monks exaggerated Glastonbury's link to post-Roman resistance and Arthur, it wasn't entirely made up. High-status buildings have been found on Tor Hill, confirmed by archaeology. The site might have been a chief's stronghold or monastery property. Excavations found reused Roman pottery and building materials, along with high-quality pottery from the Mediterranean. These might be from amphorae used for wine and olive oil. William of Malmesbury, a 12th century historian with a Norman father and English mother, gives interesting details about Glastonbury. He says the first church, called the Old Church by the Anglo-Saxons, was built of mud and reeds by the followers of Christ. Gathercole notes that traces of such buildings have been found, but it's unclear if they were built by Britons or Saxons. William also writes that some of the early abbots were Britons, and that land was donated to the abbey by a king of Dumnonia. Back then, the area was called Innis Witrin, Glass Island in Welsh. Gathercole thinks the traditions of Glastonbury's Briton origins may be partly true, but not certainly. The first reliable documents about the abbey's ownership date to the late 7th century. There is no strong archaeological or written proof of the abbey before then. However, a document dated 601, now believed to be fake, might reflect a real land gift to the old church by a Dumnonian king. Some Saxon documents show early abbots had Briton names, which suggests a Briton tradition was taken over by the Saxons. Glastonbury Abbey might not have grown much under King Alfred the Great, 871 to 899, likely because of Viking attacks on southern England. But when Dunstan became abbot in 946 and reformed the abbey under the Benedictine rule, Glastonbury grew greatly. Kings Edmund, Edgar, and Edmund Ironside were buried there, and for a time the English royal treasury was kept there. The abbey became sometimes the richest among England's great Benedictine houses. According to the Domesday Book, in the second half of the 11th century, it was the richest abbey in England, despite the economic and spiritual upheavals caused by the Norman conquest. But a great fire in 1184 destroyed the old church, and many books, holy clothes, and relics. After this disaster, in 1191, Glastonbury monks claimed they had found the grave and remains of King Arthur. We believe there is a symbolic link between the removal of the English nuns from Amesbury and the discovery of Arthur's grave in Glastonbury. At Amesbury, the nuns guarded the relics of Saint Mellor, who was connected to the pre-Christian god Nodens, known as Lud Llefelys. Mellor's silver hand symbolized respect for an ancestor from before Christianity, just like how the people of Uli protected the head of Lugus Mercury after the Roman era. Similarly, finding Arthur's grave in Glastonbury was an act of respect for an ancient ancestor. Arthur might have started as the sky god Arcturus of the Druids, and in real life, as Reno suggested, he may have been Ambrosius Aurelianus. But by the 12th century, the monks could no longer tell legend from fact, and they displayed the relics of this great figure as a way to show their respect. The Druids had long disappeared from history, but their monster-slaying hero continued to live in Glastonbury, perhaps the most lasting legacy the Druids left behind.